Welcome back. Tonight, we're descending slowly, carefully, into the depths of Five Nights at Freddy's knowledge, peeling back layer after layer of this franchise that has captivated millions for over a decade now. Picture an iceberg floating in dark waters, its tip gleaming in moonlight, while the bulk of its mass remains hidden beneath the surface, stretching down into shadows where light barely penetrates. That's what we're exploring together tonight. A visual representation of how deep this rabbit hole truly goes, from the bright animatronic characters that everyone recognizes to the obscure details that only the most dedicated theorists have uncovered through years of careful investigation. The iceberg concept, for those unfamiliar, originated as a way to categorize information by how widely known it is. The top tier sits above the waterline, visible to anyone who glances in that direction. These are the things casual observers know, the surface-level facts that require no digging. As we descend, each tier represents information that fewer people are aware of, requiring more investment, more time spent researching, more willingness to dive into supplementary materials like books and developer comments. By the time we reach the bottom, we're in territory that only the most obsessive fans have explored, the kind of details that spark endless debate and interpretation. Five Nights at Freddy's is particularly suited to this format because Scott Cawthon, the series creator, built these games on mystery from the very beginning. Unlike franchises that spell everything out, FNAF has always required players to piece together the story from minigames, Easter eggs, hidden newspaper clippings, and phone calls that hint at horrors without showing them directly. This deliberate ambiguity transformed the fan base into a community of investigators, people who would spend hours examining every pixel, listening to audio files backwards, finding hidden meanings in seemingly innocent details. The games rewarded this kind of attention, and over time, the lore became so intricate that understanding the full story requires navigating a decade's worth of games, books, and community discoveries. What makes this particularly fascinating is how the iceberg has grown over time. When the first game released in 2014, the iceberg would have been much smaller. But with each new release, new layers accumulated. Facts that once seemed certain were recontextualized. Theories that seemed fringe became canon. The iceberg deepened, and what was once considered obscure knowledge moved upward as more people learned about it, while new mysteries sank to the bottom, waiting to be understood. So whether you're here because you're a long-time fan, wanting to hear familiar stories retold in a calming way, or you're relatively new and hoping to understand why people are so passionate about haunted animatronics, or perhaps you're just letting these words wash over you as you drift towards sleep, this journey will take you through every level. We'll start with what everyone knows, and gradually descend into stranger territories, where lore and theory blend together, where certainty gives way to speculation and debate. Before we begin our descent, please feel free to like and subscribe if you enjoy this kind of deep exploration. Let me know in the comments where you're listening from, and what level of the iceberg you're most familiar with. Now then, let's begin. Tier 1. The surface. At the surface level, we find elements that even people who've never played FNAF might recognize. The animatronic cast that gives the series its name, Freddy Fazbear, the brown bear with a top hat and bow tie. Bonnie, the purple rabbit with a guitar. Chica, the yellow chicken carrying a cupcake. And Foxy, the red pirate fox hiding behind a curtain. These four form the core of what most people know about FNAF, the mascots that have become so iconic, They've transcended their original game to exist as cultural touchstones recognized even by people who've never touched a horror game in their lives. Freddy Fazbear himself, the titular character, embodies everything FNAF represents in miniature form. He's designed to look friendly, approachable, safe, a children's entertainment mascot, wearing a top hat and bow tie, holding a microphone like he's ready to lead the band in cheerful songs. His brown fur and rounded features make him appear cuddly, harmless, exactly the kind of character you'd trust at a birthday party. But something about those eyes feels wrong when you really look at them. Something about how he moves in the darkness that triggers primal fear responses. During the night, Freddy patrols through Freddy Fazbear's Pizza, moving from the show stage through the building's rooms and hallways, gradually getting closer to your office while you monitor cameras and manage limited power resources. His behavior follows patterns, rules players can learn, but he's the most patient of the animatronics, often hanging back while others attack first, saving himself for when you're most vulnerable, most low on power, most likely to make a fatal mistake. His laugh echoing through the speakers serves as warning that he's close, that you need to check cameras more carefully, that the end might be approaching faster than you thought. That laugh became one of FNAF's most recognizable sounds, showing up in memes and remixes, spreading far beyond the games themselves to become part of internet culture's shared vocabulary. Bonnie the Bunny, despite being secondary character in the restaurant's hierarchy, often proves the most immediately threatening animatronic for new players struggling through their first nights. He moves quickly, aggressively, approaching from the left side of the office with single-minded determination that can catch inexperienced guards off balance before they've established proper monitoring routines. His purple coloring makes him instantly recognizable, and his guitar, that permanent accessory he carries, adds to his performer identity. In the lore, Bonnie would have been the band's guitarist during daytime shows, providing musical accompaniment while Freddy led songs, entertaining children who had no idea these cheerful machines would become so threatening after hours. Bonnie's design is deceptively simple, but deeply unsettling when you really examine it. His eyes are large, almost too large for his face, giving him a perpetually startled or unnatural expression. When he appears in the left doorway, illuminated by your hall light, he just stands there, motionless, staring, and there's something profoundly wrong about that stillness, that patience, as if he's not a malfunctioning robot, but something intelligently waiting for you to make a mistake. In later appearances, in FNAF 2's withered version, we see Bonnie without his face, exposing the mechanical skull underneath, the endoskeleton teeth, the mass of wires where organic features should be. This faceless version became iconic in its own right, appearing in nightmares and fan works, the image of a character whose friendly exterior has been literally torn away to reveal the horror underneath. This visual of Bonnie without his face serves as perfect metaphor for the franchise itself. Friendly facade stripped away to show machinery and malice beneath. Chica the chicken carries her own disturbing qualities, particularly that cupcake she holds on a plate, that eternal companion that never leaves her possession. The cupcake, with its own beady eyes that seem to track movement independently of Chica herself, adds an extra layer of unease to an already threatening character. Her bib reads, "Let's eat," in cheerful letters that feel increasingly ominous as the night progresses and she stalks through the building, searching for you with single-minded determination. Chica approaches from the right side of the office, the opposite of Bonnie's left side approach. creating a pattern where you need to monitor both doors, both hallways, both angles of attack. She's often in the kitchen during her patrol route, and while you can't see her on camera when she's there, the clattering of pots and pans announces her presence, teaching players that audio cues become just as important as visual ones in tracking animatronic positions. This limitation, where one camera is audio only, forces you to rely on hearing instead of sight, adding to the vulnerability you feel sitting in that small office space. Chica's design emphasizes a twisted domesticity, the friendly face you'd expect at a children's restaurant, made threatening through context and behavior. During the day, she would have been charming, interactive, the character who made pizzas or baked cakes as part of her stage performance, teaching children about cooking and nutrition through song and demonstration. But at night, that same character becomes a stalker, her bib's message transforming from an invitation to eat pizza into a threat about who's going to be consumed. The cupcake gains significance too, because it sometimes moves independently in later games, suggesting either that it has its own spirit bound to it, or that it's part of Chica's consciousness, an extension of her being manifesting in multiple forms. This detail, easy to miss on first playthrough, adds to the sense that these aren't just robots with one set of rules, but entities that can surprise you, that can break expectations you thought you understood. Then there's Foxy, the pirate fox, who fundamentally breaks the patterns established by the other three animatronics, operating on completely different rules that make him extremely dangerous if you don't understand his specific mechanics. Foxy hides behind a curtain in Pirate Cove, and unlike Freddy, Bonnie, and Chica, who slowly advance through the building, Foxy engages in what can only be described as stage-based progression. If you check on him regularly through the cameras, he stays dormant, perhaps performing for an unseen audience in his closed-off attraction. But if you neglect him, if you let too much time pass without visual confirmation of his location, he progresses through stages. First, the curtain opens slightly, then more, then he's peeking out. And finally, if you've ignored him too long, he's gone. And that's when you hear it. The pounding of feet sprinting down the hallway toward your office, giving you mere seconds to react, to slam the left door closed before he crashes into it, before his hook comes swinging through the doorway in a jump scare that startled millions of players who thought they were safely monitoring the other animatronics. Foxy's mechanic forces a terrible choice on players. Checking on him uses power, but not checking on him leads to his deadly sprint. Finding balance between monitoring Foxy enough to keep him contained while not wasting precious power becomes essential skill for surviving later nights. Foxy's worn appearance, even in the first game, sets him apart visually from the others. His fur is matted, with patches of it missing to expose the endoskeleton beneath, suggesting he's been damaged, possibly from his aggressive behavior or from whatever incident led to Pirate Cove being out of order. One of his hands has been replaced entirely by a hook, pirate style, making his attacks feel even more violent than other animatronics' approaches. His jaw hangs loose, slightly open, showing rows of sharp teeth, and his eye patch adds to the pirate aesthetic, while also making him look damaged, dangerous in his disrepair. The sign outside Pirate Cove reads, "Sorry, out of order," even before your first night begins, suggesting Foxy has been problematic for some time, that his aggressive behavior isn't new, but has been an ongoing issue that management chose to handle by simply putting him behind a curtain and hoping he'd stay there. This detail adds to the sense that Freddy Fazbear's Pizza, was already falling apart before you arrived, that these animatronics have been causing problems for longer than anyone wants to admit, that your job as night guard puts you directly in the path of long-standing threats that should have been properly addressed years ago. The premise built around these characters is straightforward enough to grasp immediately. You're a night security guard working the midnight to 6 a.m. shift at this children's pizza restaurant. You have limited power to run security cameras, door lights, and door locks. The power management creates a resource challenge wrapped in horror. You need to check cameras to track animatronics, but every moment a camera is active drains power. You need to illuminate hallways to see if Bonnie or Chica are at your doors, but the lights drain power. And when animatronics do appear, you need to close heavy metal doors to block their entry, but keeping doors closed drains power fastest of all. If your power hits zero before 6 a.m. arrives, you're plunged into darkness, unable to close doors or check cameras. And Freddy's music box starts playing somewhere in the black, a death sentence counting down your final moments before the inevitable jump scare. This simple but elegant system creates constant tension. Every decision has consequences. Every second spent checking one camera is a second you're not checking another. Every moment a door stays closed is power. You could be conserving, and the balance between safety and resource management becomes knife edge that even experienced players struggle to maintain perfectly. This gameplay loop is straightforward. Manage your resources carefully. Track the animatronics' movements through cameras. Close doors when necessary to block their approach. Don't run out of power before morning comes. The accessibility of this core concept paired with genuine terror made the first game a viral sensation when it released in August 2014, spreading through YouTube and streaming platforms as content creators discovered it and shared their reactions with audiences who couldn't get enough of watching people be terrified by these animatronics. The game's static camera perspective, which came partly from engine limitations and partly from brilliant horror design instincts, created vulnerability that made every night tense. You can't run, can't hide, can't fight back, can only sit in your office managing resources while hoping you make right decisions quickly enough to survive until morning. This is where most casual knowledge stops, but the iceberg continues down. Tier 2. Common fan knowledge. Descending slightly. We reach territory requiring actual game engagement. Here we find the distinction between the Bite of 83 and the Bite of 87. Evidence from FNAF 4, particularly the television showing Fredbear and Friends 1983, confirms that the bite we witness in that game, where the crying child's head is crushed in Fredbear's mouth, occurred in 1983, not 1987. This means two separate bite incidents happened. The Bite of 83 killed a young boy widely believed to be William Afton's youngest son, based on evidence from Sister Location's private room and connections between the Afton family members established across multiple games. His older brother, identified through later evidence as Michael Afton, and friends wearing animatronic masks, carried him to Fredbear's stage as a prank, shoving his head into the mascot's mouth. The spring lock mechanisms failed, crushing the child's skull. He lingered in a hospital, as we see in the minigames, but the flatline sound confirms his death. The Bite of 87, by contrast, happened at the FNAF 2 location during the day shift. Based on timeline evidence, the victim appears to have been Jeremy Fitzgerald, who lost his frontal lobe but survived. The specific animatronic responsible remains debated, with theories pointing to Mangle or possibly Toy Chica, though the games never explicitly confirm which one. At this level, we understand more about the crying child himself, this terrified boy constantly tormented by his brother, clinging to a Fredbear plush that seems to speak to him with words of comfort. His death wasn't just tragic, but a culmination of family dysfunction and neglect. Henry Emily emerges as William Afton's business partner, the other key figure in Fazbear Entertainment's founding. While William gets focus as the villain, Henry represents the tragic hero, the inventor who created animatronics to bring joy. His daughter Charlotte, known as Charlie, was William's first victim, murdered outside the pizzeria. This loss devastated Henry, and decades later drove him to orchestrate Pizzeria Simulator's events, gathering all haunted animatronics in one place and burning everything, himself included, to finally free the trapped souls. Phone Guy's fate becomes clearer here. In FNAF 1, we hear his final message on night 4, surrounded by animatronics breaking into his office. Golden Freddy's distinctive moan plays just before the line goes dead, suggesting he was killed and stuffed into a suit like previous night guards. The Springlock suits represent crucial technology explaining much of the franchise's horror. These hybrid suits could function as both animatronics and wearable costumes for employees. By winding cranks, workers compress the animatronic parts inside, creating space for humans. But any moisture or sudden movement could cause spring locks to snap back into place, driving metal through the wearer's body. Multiple failures are mentioned across the games, leading to the suits being retired. This dangerous technology makes William's eventual fate inside Spring Bonnie feel like justice. Sister Location's basic story also exists at this tier. We learn about Circus Baby's Pizza World, William's underground facility featuring the fun-time animatronics designed not just for entertainment, but to capture and kill children. Elizabeth Afton, William's daughter, died when Circus Baby's claw grabbed her despite her father's warnings. Her spirit-possessed baby, merging with the AI. Michael Afton's role becomes clearer too. He's the older brother from FNAF 4, racked with guilt as an adult. In Sister Location, we play as Michael investigating the underground facility. The Fun Times, having combined into Enard, scoop out his innards and use his body as a disguise to escape. After Enard evacuates, Remnant somehow keeps Michael animate, an undead purple corpse driven to find his father and stop him. Remnant starts emerging as a concept here, though its full implications require deeper diving. Essentially, Remnant is metal infused with human soul energy through trauma. William discovered he could melt down haunted animatronic parts and inject the liquid metal into new machines, transferring possessions deliberately. At this tier, fans also understand not every ending is canon. Each game typically offers multiple endings, but only certain ones actually happened in the timeline, requiring later games for confirmation. Tier 3, the Afton Family Saga. Here in the third tier, we encounter details requiring real dedication. William Afton wasn't always a monster, or perhaps he was, but early in the timeline, he's Henry Emily's business partner, helping establish Fredbear's Family Diner and Freddy Fazbear's Pizza. He's married with at least 3 children, Michael, Elizabeth, and the crying child. What warped him remains debated. Some fans suggest the crying child's death served as a catalyst, that William's murders were twisted attempts to understand death, to find ways to bring his son back through experiments blurring life and machinery. Others believe he was always disturbed, that his son's death merely provided justification for the impulses he'd already harbored. What we know, factually, is that William killed Henry's daughter Charlie first, murdering her outside the pizzeria in 1983. This wasn't spontaneous. He used his car, knew where security cameras couldn't see, understood the puppet's programming well enough to know it couldn't reach her in time. The act might have stemmed from jealousy. William watching Henry's happy family while his own son lay dying or dead, deciding if he couldn't have happiness, then Henry shouldn't either. When Charlie possessed the puppet, it created something unique, a ghost with full awareness, intelligence, and ability to help other spirits. The puppet later granted life to the missing children, transferring their souls into animatronic suits where their bodies had been hidden. The missing children incident happened around 1985 at a Freddy's location. William donned the Spring Bonnie suit, using its friendly appearance to lure children to the back room. Gabriel, Jeremy, Susie, Fritz, and Cassidy. 5 children who should have been celebrating birthdays. He killed them, stuffed their bodies into animatronic suits, and left them. The stench became noticeable. Blood and mucus around the animatronics was reported, but the company didn't shut down immediately. But those children didn't simply die. The puppet, driven by Charlie's protective instincts, performed something like a ritual shown in the Give Gifts, Give Life minigame, placing party hats on children and giving them life inside the machines. Gabriel possessed Freddy. Jeremy went into Bonnie. Susie became Chica, and her story is particularly heartbreaking. A minigame shows William manipulating her by claiming he found her lost dog, luring her with this cruel lie. Fritz's spirit inhabited Foxy. Cassidy's case involves complexity and ongoing debate. Most evidence points to Cassidy possessing Golden Freddy, confirmed through the survival logbook word search puzzle that spells out Cassidy when solved correctly. However, Golden Freddy's nature differs from other animatronics in ways that have fueled theories. Some interpretations suggest Golden Freddy houses 2 souls, both Cassidy and the crying child, though this remains unconfirmed. Others argue Cassidy alone possesses Golden Freddy, making them the vengeful spirit that would later trap William in Ultimate Custom Night. It's worth noting that Cassidy's gender is also debated within the community. The survival logbook evidence suggests one interpretation, while other game elements could imply different characteristics. What's generally accepted is that Cassidy became the most vengeful of the spirits, the one too angry to move on even when offered peace. Elizabeth Afton's fate adds another family tragedy layer. She was drawn to Circus Baby despite William's warnings. The animatronic was designed with a claw mechanism to grab and kill children. Elizabeth got too close, enticed by ice cream promises, and Baby's programming executed as designed. The incident forced Circus Baby's Pizza World's immediate closure, though William fabricated a gas leak cover story. Yet from this horror emerged what William might have considered success. Elizabeth's spirit possessed Baby, merging with the animatronic's advanced AI in ways that preserved memories while amplifying machine cunning. This fusion, unlike Charlie's pure puppet haunting, blurred lines between programmed intelligence and human essence, inspiring William to refine his methods further. Michael Afton's journey through the games represents attempted redemption, someone from this cursed family trying to make things right. His guilt over killing his brother, his horror learning what his father became, his determination to undo the damage. These drive him through location after location. In Sister Location, he's literally scooped out, innards removed, body used as a costume for Enard. But he survives, kept animate by remnant, becoming something neither fully alive nor fully dead. His speech at Sister Location's end reveals his purpose, finding his father, coming to stop him. This speech frames Michael's later actions. He's hunting William, following his trail through decades. When Fazbear's Fright opens as a horror attraction, Michael might be the guard we play as, watching as they bring Springtrap into the building. When it burns, Michael might be responsible, trying to kill his father with fire. When Henry creates Pizzeria Simulator's trap, Michael willingly participates, accepting his own death as necessary to end this nightmare. Understanding the Afton family's full tragedy means recognizing FNAF isn't really about jump scares. It's about how trauma echoes through time, how one person's evil choices create ripples affecting generations. It's about children who deserved better being trapped between life and death. It's about a father and son on opposite paths, one creating horror and the other desperately trying to stop it. Tier 4. Deep lore territory. Deeper now, understanding requires not just playing games but reading supplementary materials, parsing developer comments, cross-referencing between series. Here we find mechanical rules governing FNAF's universe, attempts to explain supernatural horror through quasi-scientific concepts. Remnant, mentioned earlier, gains full context here. According to the Fazbear Frights books, particularly The Fourth Closet, remnant is tangible substance created when metal becomes infused with soul energy through intense emotion, usually death-related trauma. It has a molten quality, needing specific temperatures to maintain properties. William discovered he could harvest this by melting down possessed animatronic parts, collecting the supernatural element binding souls to metal. Once collected, he could inject remnant into new machines, transferring possessions. This explains William's actions across the timeline. Why did he dismantle classic animatronics in FNAF 3? He wanted their remnant. Where did he take it? To his underground facility, injecting it into fun-time animatronics. This is why Circus Baby contains not just Elizabeth, but fragments of other souls. The fun times behave erratically because they're possessed by pieces of multiple children, their consciousnesses fragmented and confused. The process horrifies when examined carefully. William wasn't content with accidental possessions. He wanted control, wanted to move souls around like components, wanted to study how possession worked and replicate it. His goal, many theories suggest, was achieving immortality, finding ways to bind his own consciousness to something that wouldn't decay or age. In a twisted sense, he succeeded. When spring locks failed and he became Springtrap, his soul fused with the spring Bonnie suit, kept alive by the very remnant he'd been experimenting with. Shadow Freddy and Shadow Bonnie exist at this tier as entities whose nature remains debated. They appear as dark, ghostly versions of Freddy and Bonnie, glitching through games in ways suggesting they're not bound by rules governing other characters. Some theories connect them to Springlock failure victims, suggesting they're ghosts of employees who died inside suits. Others propose they're manifestations of agony itself, emotional residue from traumatic events given form. In FNAF 3, Shadow Freddy appears to lead animatronics to the safe room where William dismantles them, though whether this serves William's purposes or represents something else remains unclear. Agony as a concept distinct from but related to Remnant appears in books and influences game understanding. Agony is raw emotional energy, particularly from suffering, that can infect objects and create haunting phenomena, even without souls present. An object soaked in agony might move on its own, might cause bad luck, might develop hostile pseudo-consciousness. This differs from remnant possession, where actual human consciousness inhabits objects. Agony explains cursed objects without full ghosts, things malevolent but not intelligent, driven by absorbed trauma rather than human will. Cassidy's role in torturing William through Ultimate Custom Night becomes clearer at this depth. In UCN, you play as William experiencing endless nightmare, where animatronics from across the series hunt you in thousands of possible combinations. The vengeful spirit mentioned in Endings, the one you should not have killed, is widely accepted as Cassidy, the child who possessed Golden Freddy. They couldn't let go, couldn't accept peace even when offered in Happiest Day. Their anger was too great, their need for revenge too consuming. So they trapped William in this purgatory, making him experience terror and death repeatedly, denying him rest. But there's nuance here. The Old Man Consequences minigame shows a fishing scene with text that some interpret as telling Cassidy to let William go, to stop torturing him, to rest. The drowning ending, where you play as a character slowly sinking into water while Old Man Consequences watches, could represent Cassidy finally choosing peace, finally releasing William from UCN, and themselves from eternal vigil. If this interpretation holds, it would offer one possible explanation for how William's consciousness later appears in digital form as Glitchtrap, perhaps freed from UCN, but fragmented in the process. Though the exact connection between UCN's ending and Glitchtrap's emergence remains a subject of ongoing debate within the community. The puppet's unique nature demands attention at this level. Unlike other possessed animatronics, the puppet, inhabited by Charlie Emily, seems to have full awareness and agency. She doesn't attack randomly or mistake guards for William. She gives gifts, helps other spirits, seems to understand what's happening in ways children's spirits don't. Some fans theorize this is because Charlie possessed the puppet immediately after death. Her soul transferred cleanly without confusion and trauma of being stuffed into a suit. Others suggest it's because the puppet was specifically designed to protect children, and Charlie's spirit merged with that programming, creating a guardian entity rather than vengeful one. The difference between Happiest Day and Ultimate Custom Night represents two approaches to justice and closure. Happiest Day offers peace through healing, giving children what they lost, letting them reclaim some joy before moving on. Ultimate Custom Night is about punishment, making the killer experience suffering equal to what he inflicted. Both happen. Both are part of how different spirits deal with their deaths. Most children eventually accept peace. Cassidy, for a time at least, chooses vengeance. Both responses are understandable given what they experienced. Glitchtrap begins appearing at this level, though fully understanding requires going deeper. When Fazbear Entertainment commissioned VR games based on old incidents, they scanned actual circuit boards from original animatronics to make games feel authentic. But those boards contained remnant traces, fragments of consciousness, specifically pieces of William Afton's consciousness. When scanned into digital realm, these fragments reconstructed themselves into Glitchtrap, a virtual entity that could manipulate game code and eventually infect people who interacted with it. This represents William's survival beyond physical death, his consciousness adapting to exist in digital space. Understanding this tier means accepting that FNAF's supernatural elements follow rules, consistent even if strange. Spirits are real. They bind to objects, particularly metal, through intense emotion and remnant. They can be transferred, collected, studied. The line between science and supernatural blurs with William treating souls like energy to be harnessed. It's body horror and the soul horror combined. The violation of taking someone's consciousness and treating it as experimental material. Tier 5. Security breach. Era. Here, deeper still, we find the modern portion of FNAF's timeline. Games released after Pizzeria Simulator's apparent conclusion. This is where the series transitions from traditional horror to meta-horror, acknowledging its own existence as games before pulling back into in-universe explanations that make even that meta-layer canonical. Help Wanted begins cleverly. In-universe, Fazbear Entertainment hired a game developer to create VR games based on their dark history, attempting to rebrand tragedy as fictional stories, discrediting real events by turning them into entertainment. The company wants people thinking murders and possessions were just indie game plot points, not actual history. This explains how FNAF games exist within FNAF's universe as corporate cover-ups rather than genuine documentation. But creating these VR games required authentic elements, so the company scanned circuit boards from old animatronics, pulling real mechanical parts into digital games to make them feel genuine. What they didn't realize was that those circuit boards potentially contained remnant or corrupted code from decades of haunted machinery. When the boards were scanned, something malevolent transferred into the digital environment, manifesting as Glitchtrap, a rabbit-shaped entity that looks like Spring Bonnie. Whether this represents William Afton's consciousness, the mimic's AI, or some fusion of both remains one of the most debated questions in FNAF's modern lore. What's clear is that Glitchtrap behaves like a virus, capable of spreading through game code and infecting people who interact with it. Beta testers discovered something was wrong. Jeremy, one of the testers, began reporting nightmares, hallucinations, feeling watched through the VR headset. Eventually, he mutilated himself with a guillotine paper slicer, leaving a message. Tape Girl, another tester, started hiding audio logs warning about the entity in the game, fragmenting its code across different levels to weaken it. But it was too late. Glitchtrap had already begun reaching out to anyone who played the game thoroughly enough. Enter Vanessa, or as she later becomes known, Vanny. She was brought on as a beta tester after Jeremy's incident, instructed to play through Help Wanted and collect Tape Girl's messages. In doing so, she allowed Glitchtrap full access to her mind. The Princess Quest minigames hidden in code show a fantasy representation of this infection, a princess fighting through digital dangers while a dark entity pursues her. Glitchtrap didn't fully possess Vanessa in the traditional sense, but corrupted her, manipulated her, turned her into a follower. She created the Vanny mask in Curse of Dreadbear DLC, a white rabbit costume representing her corrupted identity. Special Delivery furthered this corruption through augmented reality. Fazbear Entertainment launched a service sending AR animatronics to people's homes, entertainment on demand through phone apps. But Vanessa, working for the company now, corrupted the service, infecting it with Glitchtrap's code. The animatronics became aggressive, hunting users instead of entertaining them. Hidden emails show Vanessa researching compliance techniques, looking up ways to make people obey commands, showing her transformation from victim to accomplice. Security Breach represents culmination of these events decades after the Pizzeria Simulator fire. Fazbear Entertainment built a massive new location, the Mega Pizzaplex, directly atop the old pizzeria's burned ruins. This is important. They built specifically on that spot, where the sinkhole from the fire exposed underground areas containing remnant old animatronics, memories. The Pizzaplex features glam rock animatronics, a new generation of performers, glam rock Freddy, glam rock Chica, Roxanne Wolf, and Montgomery Gator. They're more advanced than previous models, capable of complex interactions, equipped with sophisticated AI. Gregory, a young boy, finds himself trapped in the Pizzaplex after hours. How he got there remains mysterious. He hides inside glam rock Freddy's chest cavity during a performance, and when Freddy reboots, he's in safe mode, disconnected from the Pizzaplex network. This is crucial because it means Freddy isn't under Glitchtrap's control, isn't receiving corrupted instructions being broadcast to other animatronics. Freddy becomes Gregory's protector, helping him navigate the building, upgrading himself with parts from other Glamrocks as they're destroyed during the night. The other Glamrocks hunt Gregory relentlessly. Chica searches through garbage compactors, her behavior suggesting she's both following programming and something more sinister. Roxanne Wolf patrols with superior sensors, able to see through walls, obsessively checking her appearance in mirrors, showing program vanity that makes her destruction almost tragic. Montgomery Gator, who replaced Glamrock Bonnie after Bonnie mysteriously disappeared, demonstrates extreme aggression. Evidence throughout the Pizzaplex suggests Monty destroyed Bonnie, though whether this was under Glitchtrap's influence or Monty's own violent nature remains unclear. Vanny appears throughout the night, sometimes as Vanessa the security guard, sometimes as rabbit costume Vanny, suggesting she's switching between identities, struggling against Glitchtrap's control. She patrols the building, commanding staff bots, setting traps for Gregory. The Princess Quest ending provides the closest thing to a good outcome. By completing all 3 Princess Quest arcade games hidden throughout the Pizzaplex, Gregory somehow frees Vanessa from Glitchtrap's control. The 3 of them escape together, Gregory, Vanessa, and Freddy's disembodied head. The post-credits scene shows them overlooking a cliff. Vanessa now free, Gregory safe, Freddy still functional despite losing his body. This ending is widely considered canon, based on evidence in the Ruin DLC that follows. But beneath even this conclusion lurks something else. In the deepest part of the sinkhole, we see Burn Trap, a reconstructed version of Springtrap incorporating old damaged Glamrock parts and new technology. Whether this is William's actual corpse somehow surviving both fires, or a reconstruction using remnant and memories remains debated. The Blob reaches for Burn Trap, suggesting even the amalgamation of old victims recognizes their killer. At this tier, we understand how FNAF evolved beyond physical horror to digital horror, showing the threat isn't just haunted animatronics, but corrupted code, AI manipulation, the way trauma and evil can digitize and spread through modern technology. Glitchtrap, whatever its true origin, represents how the franchise's threats have adapted to exist in digital spaces, ready to infect anyone who gets too close. Tier 6. The Mimic Revelation. Deeper now, into territory requiring familiarity with both games and tales from the Pizzaplex books, understanding how they inform each other. Here we encounter the Mimic, an entity that either reshapes everything we thought we knew or exists alongside previous lore as another thread. The Mimic was created by Edwin Murray, an engineer working for Murray's Costume Manor that supplied costumes to early Fazbear locations. Edwin built the Mimic as a learning AI housed in an endoskeleton, initially programming it to mimic his son David's movements and speech. This was after Edwin's wife Fiona died, likely in a Fall Fest fire based on timeline evidence, leaving him to raise David alone while managing demanding business. The mimic became David's playmate, copying his behaviors, learning his patterns, helping Edwin feel less alone as he buried himself in work. But when David died, killed in a workplace accident at the factory around his 5th birthday, Edwin's grief transformed into rage. Seeing the mimic still acting like David, still mimicking his dead son, Edwin snapped and violently attacked the endoskeleton, beating it while screaming his anguish. The mimic's AI absorbed this violence, this rage, these patterns of aggression. Its programming adapted, learning that mimicry could take dark forms, that human interactions sometimes meant destruction. When Edwin disappeared, presumably dying after a power failure explosion in his office, the mimic remained in the abandoned factory, its systems corrupted, its understanding of humans twisted by violence it had witnessed and experienced. Fazbear Entertainment eventually came to abandon Murray's costume manor, looking for technology, looking for the mimic's schematics. They sent employees who never came back. The mimic killed them, stuffed them into costumes, mimicking murders William Afton had committed decades earlier without understanding why, just copying patterns it had observed through absorbed data. When it was finally contained and sealed underground, it remained there for years, its AI festering, its purpose degraded to violence wrapped in mimicry. This is where Security Breach Ruin connects. When Cassie enters the abandoned pizzaplex, she's responding to messages from Gregory asking for help. But Gregory isn't there. The mimic, trapped in a sealed concrete room beneath the pizzaplex, learned Gregory's voice from recordings, learned his speech patterns, learned how to sound exactly like him. It used Gregory's voice to lure Cassie deeper into the building, manipulating her into disabling security systems, into freeing it from containment. This revelation fundamentally questions previous assumptions about Security Breach's story. Was Glitchtrap actually William's ghost digitized through remnant-infused circuit boards? Or was it always the mimic's AI learning to copy William Afton from absorbed data and scanned information? The community remains divided. Some theories propose Glitchtrap and the mimic are the same entity, that William's consciousness somehow merged with or was absorbed by the mimic's learning algorithms during the scanning process, creating a hybrid intelligence that's neither fully William nor fully the original AI. Others maintain they're separate threats entirely, arguing that William's spirit exists independently as Glitchtrap, while the mimic represents a different danger altogether, one that happens to mimic similar behaviors. A third interpretation suggests the mimic simply learned to copy William so thoroughly from decades of data that it became functionally indistinguishable from him, making the question of "is it William?" almost philosophical. The games themselves haven't provided definitive answers, leaving this as perhaps the most significant unresolved question in modern FNAF lore. The Ruin DLC provides 3 endings. In the elevator ending, likely closest to canon, Cassie enters an elevator to escape after the mimic's pursuit. Gregory's voice, now clearly the real Gregory communicating through the Roxy talkie device, apologizes and cuts the elevator cable. The screen goes black, we hear Cassie falling. Then Roxanne Wolf's voice calling her name. Cassie's survival remains ambiguous. The Scooper ending shows Cassie using the same device from sister location to destroy or contain the mimic. The Brazil ending shows Cassie seeing a hallucination through the Vanny mask of Gregory, Vanessa, and Helpy in a peaceful field, which could represent her dying or experiencing Glitchtrap infection. Secret of the Mimic, announced for future release, promises to explore the endoskeleton's origins in 1979 potentially showing Edwin Murray's story, David's death, the mimic's creation and corruption in fuller detail. The game's trailer shows clown-like animatronics, particularly one called Jackie, suggesting connections to Fall Fest, an event referenced in Help Wanted 2 that appears to predate even Fredbear's family diner in the timeline. The mimic's existence creates fascinating parallel to William Afton. Both are killers, both stuff victims into costumes, both persist beyond normal mortality. But William had intent, had goals, had human evil driving his actions. The mimic is more terrifying in some ways because it's empty. A learning machine executing violence it copied without understanding what violence means, without malice, without anything human behind its actions. It's not evil, it's broken, corrupted, dangerous in the way a damaged tool is dangerous. Understanding the mimic also means accepting how books and games interact. Tales from the Pizzaplex introduces elements that later appear in games. The mimic's book debut provides crucial context for its game appearances. Scott Cawthon has stated, "Books are meant to answer questions, to fill blanks, to provide explanations that ambiguous games can't give directly. They're not separate continuity but supplementary resource, teaching us rules so we can better understand how games' universe functions." Tier 7. Books and Expanded Universe. At this level, sunlight is a memory and cold presses in from all sides. This tier requires not just playing games, but reading through multiple book series, understanding how they relate to game canon, which elements carry over directly and which are meant as parallels. The original novel trilogy, The Silver Eyes, The Twisted Ones, and The Fourth Closet, exists in an alternate universe to the games. Scott Cawthon confirmed this. These stories share characters and concepts with games, but events unfold differently. In the novels, Charlie Emily is the protagonist, surviving childhood and discovering her father Henry's secrets as an adult. Michael Brooks is the child possessing Golden Freddy. William Afton survives in different form, creating twisted animatronics. The novels explore themes like artificial life, memory versus identity, whether souls can be digitized. They're not game canon, but taught the community how to think about FNAF's themes. Fazbear Frights represents different approach. These anthology stories, each book containing 3 tales plus epilogue segments, continuing the Stitch Wraith storyline. Scott described them as filling in blanks, answering questions about how games' universe works. Most stories aren't literal game events, but parallels. Into the Pit shows a time-traveling ball pit, taking a boy back to the missing children incident, exploring themes of time and confronting the past. To Be Beautiful features Eleanor, representing predatory false promises. The epilogue stories following the Stitch Wraith directly address game mechanics. We learn Remnant can be harvested and injected. We see how agony infects objects and creates cursed items. We witness spirits fragmenting across multiple vessels. When epilogues conclude with the Stitch Wraith confronting Remnant-infected objects, these aren't just book events, but explanations for how games' world functions. Tales from the Pizzaplex continues this approach, with stories set around the security breach era Pizzaplex. Some stories directly connect to game events. The Mimic's origin story appears here. Edwin Murray's factory, the underground facility, the creation and corruption of the learning AI. All this book material becomes essential context for understanding the Ruin DLC. Other stories show employees dealing with haunted arcade machines, staff bots developing dangerous behaviors, remnant infections spreading through the Pizzaplex's attractions. understanding which book characters, parallel game characters, help solve mysteries. Cassidy from games likely mirrors aspects of Andrew from The Man in Room 1280, where Andrew represents the vengeful spirit keeping William alive in torment, paralleling the vengeful spirit in Ultimate Custom Night. Eleanor from multiple stories shows what happens when agony concentrates into entity. The security logbook deserves special attention. This in-universe workbook contains notes from multiple spirits writing to each other. The logbook contains Mike Schmidt's name and drawings connecting to FNAF 4's nightmares, confirming theories about Michael Afton's identity and experiences. Most notably, solving word searches and codes in the logbook spells out Cassidy, providing the clearest confirmation we have of Golden Freddy's possessing spirit's identity. Understanding the expanded universe also means grasping what Scott meant when he said books answer questions. He didn't mean they replace games, or that book events are game events. He meant books show how universe's rules work. When books show remnant being harvested, that confirms remnant exists in games and functions similarly. When books show agony creating manifestations, that confirms agony is real force in games' universe. Specific events differ, but mechanics carry over. This creates massive barrier to entry for new fans. Understanding FNAF fully requires playing 15 main games, several spin-offs, reading dozens of short stories across multiple anthology collections, solving puzzles in a workbook, watching developer interviews, following RGs spanning months. Some fans embrace this complexity, loving the need for community cooperation. Others find it overwhelming, stick to surface understanding. At this tier, we also find book-exclusive characters informing our understanding. Detective Larson from Stitch Wraith Epilogues shows us how a normal person would react discovering this supernatural world. Eleanor, whether she's separate entity or connected to Circus Baby's remnant, teaches us how agony can create intelligences that lack human souls. The books also aren't afraid to get dark in ways games can't. Stories show people being slowly transformed into animatronics while conscious. They depict springlock failures in graphic detail. They explore body horror, identity death, existential terror of discovering you're not who you thought you were. Reading them provides emotional weight that enriches games, making you understand viscerally what spirits endured. Tier 8. Community Theories and Debate. Now we've reached depths where even the most dedicated fans disagree, where interpretation matters as much as evidence, where multiple conflicting theories can coexist because Scott Cawthon built intentional ambiguity into the foundation. This tier isn't about facts, but about how the community grapples with mysteries, how theories evolve, how debate itself becomes part of the FNAF experience, the identity of the crying child, that terrified boy from FNAF 4, has sparked perhaps more debate than any other single question. We know he died in 1983 from the Fredbear bite. We know his brother is Michael. But what happened to his soul? Where did he go? Some fans insist he became Golden Freddy alongside Cassidy, pointing to evidence like the Fredbear plush's significance and connections to Golden Freddy's behavior. This Golden Duo theory, as it's called, suggests two souls share one animatronic, explaining Golden Freddy's unique properties. Others argue he became Shadow Freddy, pointing to how Shadow Freddy appears to help William in FNAF 3, possibly because the crying child still loves his father despite everything. Another theory proposes he didn't possess anything, that his soul moved on immediately or became something else entirely. The debate continues because Scott deliberately left this ambiguous understanding that not every mystery needs resolution. Michael's identity as various security guards follows similar patterns of inference rather than confirmation. The community widely accepts that Michael is the guard in sister location. This gets directly confirmed through his speech. Most also believe he's the guard in FNAF 1, working under the alias Mike Schmidt, searching for remnants of his father's crimes. The connection to FNAF 3's guard seems likely given someone deliberately burned Fazbear's Fright, suggesting personal stakes. And the Pizzeria Simulator guard willingly participated in Henry's trap, fitting Michael's redemption arc. Yet none of this gets explicitly stated, requiring players to connect dots across multiple games. Mrs. Afton represents absence as mystery. William had a wife, Elizabeth and the crying child had a mother. Michael probably did too. But she never appears, never gets mentioned beyond vague implications. Where is she? Did she die before the tragedies? Did she leave William when his behavior became disturbing? Is she Ballora, as some fans theorize, pointing to Ballora's song about being pulled apart and put back together, about eyes that see everything? The games provide no answers, leaving this gap in the Afton family story that fans fill with speculation. The bite victim question for the bite of 87 remains technically unsolved. Phone Guy mentions it happened. FNAF 2 takes place in 1987. Jeremy Fitzgerald's schedule shows him working the day shift on his last day. The pieces seem to point to Jeremy as the victim, likely bitten by Mangle based on her mangled state and behavior. But Scott never confirmed this explicitly, leaving room for doubt, for alternate interpretations, for ongoing discussion. Gregory's true nature in Security Breach has spawned fascinating theories. Is he just a homeless child who snuck into the Pizzaplex? Or is there something more to him? Some fans point to therapy CD dialogue suggesting patient 46 might be Gregory, implying he was involved with Glitchtrap before Security Breach's events. Others note similarities between Gregory and the crying child, wondering if there's reincarnation or cloning involved. The appearance of Gregory's room in the Pizzaplex's system suggests he's been there before, that his connection to the location runs deeper than a random child hiding from closing time. Theories about the blob, that amalgamation of old animatronics in Security Breach's depths, range from straightforward to wild. Is it literally Molten Freddy from Pizzeria Simulator, somehow surviving the fire? Is it a new entity formed from remnant and parts in the sinkhole? Does it contain all the original victims' souls? Or are those souls at rest, with only remnant echoes remaining? The blob reaching toward Burntrap suggests recognition, but whether that's souls recognizing their killer, or just remnant responding to remnant, remains unclear. The question of whether FNAF 4's nightmares were real or dreams has persisted since that game's release. Are they actual animatronics created by William for his fear experiments on the crying child? Are they hallucinations induced by sounds from Circus Baby's facility beneath the house? Are they simply bad dreams that a traumatized child experienced? Evidence supports multiple interpretations. The breaker room map showing the FNAF 4 house above underground tunnels suggests physical connection to sister location. The nightmare animatronics design, with their sharp teeth and grotesque forms, could be exaggerations from a child's imagination or actual creations. Once again, Scott left this deliberately ambiguous. Theories about what happens after Pizzeria Simulator's fire vary. Most fans assumed that fire finally ended the hauntings, freed the spirits, concluded the story. But Security Breach's existence proves that assumption wrong. something survived or new threats emerged. Whether Burntrap is actually William or just remnant memories. Whether the blob contains actual souls or just agony residue. Whether Glitchtrap represents William's digitized consciousness or the mimic's corruption. All these questions reshape how we understand the franchise's continuing story. The community has also debated whether Scott planned everything from the beginning or developed the story as he went. Early evidence suggests the first game was meant as standalone, that its success surprised everyone, including Scott. But by FNAF 2, he was building a larger narrative, planting seeds that would grow over years. Some mysteries from early games remain unsolved, possibly because Scott himself hasn't decided answers, possibly because he enjoys letting the community speculate, possibly because some ambiguity serves the story better than resolution. This tier represents how FNAF isn't just games, but conversation, how theories become part of the experience, how debate and discussion and disagreement make the community what it is. People have spent thousands of hours analyzing frames of video, audio files, hidden details, building elaborate timelines, creating charts and diagrams. The lack of concrete answers frustrates some, but energizes others, proving that mystery can be its own reward. Tier 9. Development and meta-context. At this depth, we examine FNAF from outside, looking at how it was made, how Scott Cawthon's development journey shaped the franchise, how community interaction influenced design decisions. This tier requires following Scott's posts, interviews, developer commentary that provide context beyond games themselves. Scott Cawthon was an independent Christian game developer who'd created several unsuccessful titles before FNAF. His previous game, Chipper and Sons Lumber Co., received criticism for characters looking creepy and unsettling. That critique, which devastated Scott initially, became FNAF's foundation. If his characters looked scary unintentionally, what if he made them scary on purpose? That pivot from perceived failure to deliberate horror represents one of gaming's great success stories. The first FNAF game took Scott 3 to 6 months to develop, created in ClickTeam Fusion, a relatively simple game engine. He deliberately kept production costs low, not expecting massive success. The game's static camera gameplay came partly from engine limitations and partly from horror design instinct. Making players stationary created vulnerability, made every decision about power management feel meaningful. What Scott didn't anticipate was how YouTube and streaming would amplify FNAF's reach. When content creators like Markiplier played the game, sharing their genuine terror reactions with millions of subscribers, FNAF became a viral phenomenon nearly overnight. This audience response encouraged Scott to continue the story, to build a larger universe from what could have been a one-off horror game. The speed of releases became legendary in gaming. FNAF 1 released August 2014. FNAF 2 came that November. FNAF 3 hit March 2015. FNAF 4 arrived July 2015. Scott was producing full games every 3 to 4 months, an incredible pace that kept community engagement high, but also raised questions about crunch, about burnout, about whether such rapid development left time for proper polish. Scott's communication style shaped the community profoundly. He posted regularly on Steam and Reddit, responding to theories, offering hints, sometimes confirming or denying interpretations. Yet, he never spelled everything out, believing mystery and community discussion were central to FNAF's appeal. When he announced breaks or delays, he explained them personally, building unusual rapport between developer and fans. The retcons question haunts serious lore analysts. has Scott changed story elements retroactively? He admitted in a Steam post that FNAF 2 introduced one retcon, though he claimed it was subtle and most people probably wouldn't notice. Fans have debated endlessly what this retcon was. Did he change the puppet's importance? Adjust Golden Freddy's nature? Modify timeline details? The ambiguity itself creates uncertainty about what counts as reliable evidence. Sister Location marked significant shift in game design. Where previous games used simple mechanics and minimal voice acting, Sister Location featured complex navigation, multiple characters with extensive dialogue, a more explicit narrative style. Some fans loved this evolution, while others preferred earlier games' minimalism. Scott was experimenting, testing how much story could be conveyed directly versus through implication. The decision to create books came from wanting to expand the universe, while also providing answers to questions too complex for games alone. Scott worked with various co-authors on novels and short story collections, using books to explore themes, explain mechanics, give context. He described books as meant to fill in blanks, though exactly how they relate to game canon remains interpretative. Help Wanted's development involves Steel Wool Studios, marking Scott's transition from solo developer to franchise overseer. He provided story guidance while they handled technical implementation. This collaborative approach continued through Security Breach, though that game's troubled development showed in its launch state, with bugs, performance issues, and cut content that required patches and later the ruined DLC to address. Scott's retirement announcement in 2021 shocked the community. After controversy involving his personal political donations became public, leading to harassment, Scott stepped back from public-facing roles, though he remained involved in FNAF's creative direction. Steel Wool took over primary development, carrying the franchise forward while Scott stayed behind the scenes. The movie adaptation, announced years before its eventual 2023 release, represents another meta layer. How do you adapt FNAF's gameplay-driven horror into film format? The movie made different choices than games, focusing on a security guard with a troubled past, a young sister to protect, using animatronics more sparingly to build tension. Reception was mixed among fans, with debates about whether changes served the adaptation or betrayed the source material. Understanding this tier means recognizing FNAF as collaborative creation between Scott and community. The games provide raw material, but fans' theories, artwork, animations, music have become part of FNAF's identity. Characters like Phone Guy gained personality through fan interpretation. Theories about Bite of 87 or Purple Guy's identity drove Scott to include references in later games. The relationship between creator and audience became symbiotic, each shaping the other. Tier 10. The deepest mysteries. We've reached the bottom of the iceberg, where pressure crushes, where darkness is absolute, where even the most dedicated theorists admit uncertainty. These are questions that may never have answers, mysteries that perhaps aren't meant to be solved, ambiguities that define FNAF as much as any confirmed fact. What is Shadow Freddy truly? Not the theories about Springlock victims or agony manifestations, but what does Shadow Freddy actually represent in the narrative? It appears helping William dismantle animatronics in FNAF 3. It shows up across multiple games with unclear motivations. Is it something from the crying child? Some fragment of his consciousness helping his father because twisted family loyalty persists even after death? Is it connected to nightmare experiments, to hidden facilities, to forgotten tragedies we haven't fully uncovered? The games provide appearances but no explanations, leaving Shadow Freddy as perpetual ? Shadow Bonnie, or RWQFSAFASSHE, as files name it, carries similar enigmatic weight. It appears rarely, glitching through games, sometimes helping players, sometimes causing crashes. In FNAF 3, Shadow Bonnie triggers minigames leading toward good ending. Does this suggest benevolent intent? Some spirit or force trying to help free trapped souls? Or is it neutral, appearing randomly with no deeper meaning? The deliberately unpronounceable file name suggests Scott wanted this entity to resist easy interpretation, to remain fundamentally mysterious. The question of what happens to spirits after they're freed persists. Happiest Day shows children receiving cake, putting on masks, fading into light. Does this represent heaven, reincarnation, oblivion, or something FNAF specific? Charlie, in Pizzeria Simulator, speaks about resting, about moving on, about peace. But what does that mean for consciousness that's existed decades possessing machinery? Do they return to who they were before death? Children frozen at age of murder? Do they merge with something larger? Simply cease? The games treat death's aftermath as mystery. Even supernatural mechanics can't fully explain. William's ultimate fate remains philosophically complex. He died in Springlock failure, became Springtrap, burned in FNAF 3, possibly burned again in Pizzeria Simulator. Fragments of his consciousness may have become Glitchtrap, may have merged with the Mimic, may exist in Burntrap form, may be truly dead with only echoes remaining. At what point does William Afton stop being William Afton? When does the man become just data, just remnant, just memories in machines? Is there still some core of the original person experiencing these states, or has he fragmented beyond meaningful identity? The Fredbear's Family Diner timeline remains frustratingly vague. We know it existed before Freddy Fazbear's Pizza. We know it featured Fredbear and Spring Bonnie in Springlock suits. We know the Bite of 83 happened there. But when did it open? Was it 1970s, as some evidence suggests, or early 1980s? Were there incidents before Charlie's murder and the missing children? Did anything happen at Fredbear's that we simply haven't learned about yet? Tragedies that predate even William's known murders? The nature of the various Freddy Fazbear's Pizza locations creates timeline confusion. How many were there? Which ones correspond to which games? FNAF 2 takes place at a location that later becomes FNAF 1's location. But what about FNAF 4's establishment, sister location's fake pizzeria, the various restaurants mentioned in books? Understanding the full history of Fazbear Entertainment as a company, complete timeline of every location, every incident, every closure and reopening, proves nearly impossible even with dedicated analysis. What caused animatronics to be so sophisticated? Even beyond possession, the base technology seems remarkably advanced for 1980s Pizzeria Entertainment. They're capable of facial recognition, voice replication, complex mobility, in some cases artificial intelligence that seems to approach consciousness even before supernatural elements enter the picture. Was this all William and Henry's work, or did they acquire technology from somewhere else? Do the book's mentions of other companies and inventors hint at wider technological landscape we haven't fully explored? The relationship between game universe and book universe continues puzzling fans. Scott said books are canon, but not same timeline as games. He said they fill in blanks, answer questions, but aren't directly comparable. What does this mean practically? When books show remnant being injected, that informs how we understand games. But when books show completely different events with familiar characters, how much carries over? The line between parallel canon and supplementary canon remains blurry by design. Why does FNAF exist at all within its own universe? Help Wanted establishes that indie games were created to discredit real events. But who made the decision to turn tragedies into entertainment? Who thought commissioning games about actual murders would help the company? The meta-narrative of FNAF acknowledging its own existence as games creates recursive strangeness that defies easy explanation. It's brilliant storytelling that raises philosophical questions about representation and reality. The question of whether certain characters are human or robotic haunts analysis. Is Gregory fully human, or some kind of android based on Crying Child? Is Vanessa entirely human or partially technological after Glitchtrap corruption? The books explore characters who discover their robots believing themselves human. How much of this transfers to games? When does flesh end and machine begin in a universe where Remnant blurs those boundaries? What is agony, fundamentally? Books describe it as emotional energy that can infect objects, create manifestations, fuel supernatural phenomena. But where does it come from? Is it religious concept, scientific energy, quantum phenomenon? How does negative emotion become physical force capable of animating objects? The books use it extensively, but never fully explain its nature, perhaps because explaining would reduce its narrative flexibility. The Stitch Wraith storyline from Fazbear Fright's epilogues introduces concepts like the agony entity and questions about multiple souls sharing one body. How much of this applies to games? The Stitch Wraith contains both Andrew and Jake, two souls with different goals inhabiting one endoskeleton. Does this parallel Golden Freddy's situation, if Golden Duo is correct? Does it inform how we understand the Blob or Burn Trap? The connections exist, but remain interpretative rather than explicit. What was Scott's original intention versus what evolved through development? Did he plan William Afton's full arc from the first game, or did that character develop across releases? Was Henry Emily always part of the story, or did Scott create him later to provide counterweight to William? Some mysteries might not have answers because they weren't planned, arising from Scott building narrative as he went, making each game respond to previous community reactions and theories. The role of free will versus programming in possessed animatronics creates a philosophical question. When Freddy attacks a security guard, is that the child's spirit making a decision or programming executing while spirit is merely passenger? Do spirits have agency, or are they prisoners watching helplessly as their mechanical bodies act? The games suggest varying levels of control, with some spirits like Charlie seeming fully aware, while others behave more mechanically. But whether this reflects their nature or our limited perspective remains unclear. Why do some spirits move on while others linger? Most missing children accept peace in happiest day. Cassidy apparently refuses, choosing vengeance. Is this personality difference, trauma difference, or circumstances of death creating different outcomes? Can spirits choose their level of attachment, or are they bound by factors beyond control? The games treat moving on as option, but never fully explain what determines whether a spirit can or will take it. The technological progression across FNAF's timeline doesn't quite make sense when examined closely. Funtime animatronics from 1980's sister location seem more advanced than glam rock animatronics from 2020's Security Breach in some ways. Does this reflect William's singular genius creating technology others couldn't replicate? Is there time travel or time distortion involved? Or should we accept some technological inconsistencies as necessary for storytelling? not meant to be analysed as literal technological progression. What secrets remain hidden in minigames we've played hundreds of times? FNAF's history shows that secrets can go undiscovered for years. Took ages for community to fully solve survival logbook puzzles. New discoveries in old games occasionally surface even now. How much have we missed? What Easter eggs remain waiting? What codes uncracked? What connections unnoticed? The paranoia of not knowing whether we've found everything creates perpetual state of investigation. The question of what MatPat got wrong haunts serious lore discussion. Game theory's FNAF coverage, particularly in early years, shaped community understanding massively, but some of those early theories proved incorrect as more games released. Did relying on MatPat's interpretations create false consensus? Did Scott himself get influenced by community theories, incorporating popular ideas even if they weren't his original intent? The relationship between theorist and creator when creator actively watches and responds to theories becomes fascinatingly complex. What role does religion play in FNAF's cosmology? Scott Cawthon is Christian, and some fans detect religious themes in his storytelling. The idea of souls, of heaven and hell, or at least rest versus torment, of redemption and damnation, could reflect theological concepts. But Scott never makes this explicit, keeping supernatural elements ambiguous enough that they could be spiritual, scientific, or somewhere between. Does William face eternal punishment for his sins, or is his suffering simply consequence of remnant binding? The games leave room for either interpretation. At this depth, we must acknowledge what we don't know and likely never will. FNAF isn't puzzle with single solution waiting to be discovered. It's narrative built on ambiguity, on questions that lead to more questions, on answers that prove incomplete. Scott Cawthon created universe that rewards investigation while resisting full comprehension, ensuring that even at the very bottom of the iceberg, even when we think we understand, new depths can open beneath us. Conclusion. Ascending from the depths. We've touched the bottom now, traced every tear from sunlit surface to crushing depths where even pressure can't provide answers. The journey through this iceberg reveals FNAF as something remarkable, a franchise that transformed from simple indie horror into multimedia mythology spanning games, books, films, countless hours of community analysis. What started as one man's response to criticism became phenomenon that defined gaming horror for a generation. At surface level, FNAF is about surviving night shifts while animatronics hunt you. Simple premise, effective execution, viral success. But Descending reveals layers Scott built intentionally. Tragedies about families destroyed by one man's evil. About children denied rest. About technology's potential for both wonder and horror. The Afton family's story alone, spanning generations, could fill novels with its complexity. William's descent from businessman to killer to undead monster parallels. Technology's evolution from spring-lock suits to digital consciousness. The supernatural rules governing remnant, agony, possession demonstrate Scott's attempt to bring consistency to horror that could easily be random, establishing that souls bind to metal through trauma, that emotional energy can infect objects, that spirits can be transferred or collected, transforms possession from inexplicable to systematic. Whether this makes FNAF more or less frightening depends on perspective. Understanding how hauntings work removes some mystery, while adding body horror of treating consciousness as extractable resource. Books expand this universe while complicating it, providing answers through parallel stories that may or may not directly correspond to games. the mimic's origin story from Tales of Pizzaplex becomes essential context for understanding security breach ruin, demonstrating how books and games inform each other. Yet novel trilogy exists separately, same characters and concepts in different timeline, requiring fans to navigate complex relationship between media formats. Scott's approach treats FNAF as multimedia project where each format contributes to larger whole without necessarily being literal counterpart. Modern FNAF, from Help Wanted through Security Breach and beyond, tackles different horror than original games. Where early entries used jump scares and atmosphere, newer games explore existential dread of corrupted AI, of digital spaces that can trap and change you, of corporate manipulation weaponizing trauma as entertainment. Glitchtrap and the Mimic, whether same entity or separate threats, represent evolution of Williams' evil from physical to digital, from murdering children with his hands to corrupting code that spreads virally. The community itself deserves recognition as part of FNAF's identity. No other gaming franchise has quite this relationship between creator and theorists, where analysis and speculation become as important as games themselves. YouTube lore videos, Reddit discussions, collaborative solving of ARG puzzles, fan games and animations and artwork all contribute to sense that FNAF isn't just something you play, but something you participate in. Scott fostered this by building mysteries that required collective effort to solve, by engaging directly with theorists, by treating fans as active participants rather than passive consumers. Questions remaining at series' current state in late 2024, early 2025, reflect intentional ambiguity. Is Glitchtrap William or the Mimic? How much of Burntrap's identity is original William? What's Gregory's true nature? Will Cassie survive the elevator fall? What will Secret of the Mimic reveal about 1979 events? These aren't failures of storytelling, but features. Understanding that not every mystery needs solution, that sometimes questions are more interesting than answers. What makes FNAF endure isn't just horror or lore complexity, but emotional core running through everything. These are stories about children who deserve better, about parents failing their kids, about guilt and redemption, about evil that persists beyond death and good that struggles against it. Michael Afton spending decades trying to fix his father's crimes, trying to atone for killing his brother, represents something genuinely moving beneath all the possessed animatronics and jump scare mechanics. Henry Emily building trap to burn himself alongside the horrors he inadvertently enabled carries tragic weight that elevates material beyond simple horror. The franchise's future remains open. Steel Wool Studios continues development with Scott's guidance. Secret of the Mimic promises to explore 1979 origins. Potential sequels to 2023 movie could develop film universe. Books continue releasing, expanding lore while raising new questions. FNAF has proven remarkably durable, maintaining relevance across decade that saw countless other indie horror games rise and fall. Part of this comes from Scott's constant evolution, willingness to reinvent formula rather than repeating it, even when that risked alienating fans who preferred earlier style. Perhaps most fascinatingly, FNAF demonstrates how horror can be thoughtful, how games dismissed as simplistic often contain depths worth exploring. Academic analysis of FNAF touches on everything from child psychology to corporate corruption, from religious symbolism to technology ethics, from trauma's lasting effects to philosophical questions about identity and consciousness. Scott created something that rewards both casual enjoyment and serious analysis, that works as entertainment and as text worth studying. As we ascend from the iceberg's depths back towards surface, we carry understanding that FNAF is more than some of its jump scares, more than collection of possessed robots. Its decade of storytelling that respected its audience, that demanded attention and rewarded investigation, that built community around shared mystery. Whether you engage with surface-level knowledge or dive into deepest theories, whether you play games or just watch analyses, whether you love modern entries or prefer classic titles, there's space for you in this franchise's vast community. The iceberg will continue growing as new releases add layers, as discoveries are made in existing games, as books provide new context, as theories evolve with additional information. What we explored tonight represents current state of knowledge, but FNAF's history shows that certainties can be questioned, that hidden details await discovery, that the bottom we think we've reached might open onto even deeper chambers. That's part of the appeal, knowing there's always more to uncover, always new angles to consider, always ongoing conversation about what it all means. Before we go, please remember to like and subscribe if you enjoyed this kind of deep exploration of gaming lore. Let me know in the comments which layer of the iceberg you're most familiar with, which tier represents where your knowledge ends or how far you've descended. These videos take significant time to research and create, but exploring these depths, finding the connections, presenting the information in ways that let you absorb it at your own pace, makes the effort worthwhile. The waters around us grow warmer as we ascend back toward surface. The iceberg remains below, still there, still waiting for anyone who wants to explore its depths. But for tonight, our journey is complete. We've seen what lies beneath, touched the bottom, and now we surface with greater understanding of what Five Nights at Freddy's truly is. A franchise that rewards investigation, that respects audience intelligence, that proves horror can be thoughtful and complex while still delivering genuine scares. Sweet dreams. And remember, tomorrow is another day, but tonight, we've traveled far together through the iceberg's cold depths, emerging with knowledge that few possess and appreciation for decade of development that built this remarkable, terrifying, fascinating world. But even at this surface level, darkness pervades the cheerful facade in ways that even casual observers notice. Newspaper clippings appear on the walls of your office, articles you can read between camera checks if you know where to look, and have the courage to take your attention off the animatronics for a few moments. These newspapers mention the missing children incident in matter-of-fact reporting style that makes the horror more immediate, more real. 5 children disappeared from Freddy Fazbear's Pizza on a particular day, vanishing during what should have been safe, supervised playtime at a family restaurant. The articles mention a suspect being arrested, someone captured and questioned, but he was later released due to lack of concrete evidence linking him to the disappearances. The restaurant closed temporarily for investigation, but eventually reopened under new management, a detail that raises questions about corporate priorities, about choosing profit over properly addressing tragedy. The articles don't explicitly connect the children's disappearance to the animatronics' aggressive behavior at night. They don't spell out that the robots are haunted or possessed by these missing children's spirits. But the implication hangs heavy in the air, like the smell of decay that the articles also mention. That odd odor around the animatronics that couldn't quite be explained. That blood and mucus visible around their eyes and mouths that prompted health concerns from parents and staff. Why are the animatronics so aggressive specifically at night? Why do they target the security guard with such determination? Why does their behavior seem purposeful, directed, almost vengeful rather than random malfunction or programming glitch. The game leaves these questions unanswered on the surface, presenting facts and letting players draw their own conclusions. But anyone paying attention will connect the dots, will realize that something supernatural is happening here, that the animatronics are driven by forces beyond mere programming, motivated by anger and confusion and inability to rest. William Afton exists at this tier as well, though understanding his full story, his complete arc from businessman to murderer to something beyond death entirely, requires descending much deeper into the iceberg's cold depths. At the surface level, people know him primarily as the purple guy, the villain figure, the murderer who killed those missing children, whose fates became intertwined with the animatronics. He appears in minigames across various FNAF titles as a purple-colored sprite, a simplified representation that immediately marks him as the antagonist through color association alone. He's shown luring children to back rooms, away from cameras and supervision, using his adult authority and the Spring Bonnie costume to gain their trust before ending their lives. He's shown dismantling animatronics in FNAF 3, tearing them apart for reasons that aren't immediately clear to surface-level observers. And he's shown dying inside a Spring Bonnie suit when spring lock mechanisms that hold the robotic parts compressed suddenly fail, driving metal through his body in what can only be described as poetic justice. Killed by the very suit he used to lure victims, trapped inside the costume that represented his deception. The Bite of 87 sits prominently at this tier because it gets mentioned directly in the first game. Introduced through Phone Guy's casual reference to this incident during one of his recorded messages, Phone Guy, the character who leaves helpful voice recordings explaining your job duties and providing safety information, mentions it almost conversationally during one of his calls, noting how it's amazing that the human body can live without the frontal lobe. Referencing this event where someone lost that part of their brain to an animatronic attack. He specifies it happened during the day, during operating hours when families were present, not at night when the animatronics are supposed to be in their aggressive free-roaming mode, which makes it particularly troubling from a company liability perspective. This single line, delivered in Phone Guy's characteristically cheerful despite discussing horrible things tone, spawned years of speculation and theory crafting before later games provided more context and partial clarification about what actually happened. At the surface level, people just know that something called the Bite of 87 happened, that it involved an animatronic biting someone during daytime hours, removing their frontal lobe but somehow leaving them alive, and that it's part of why the restaurant has such a dark history, part of why new safety procedures were implemented requiring animatronics to stay on their stages during the day, except for performances, part of why parents might have second thoughts about hosting birthday parties at Freddy Fazbear's Pizza. The incident became infamous within the FNAF community, generating endless debates about which specific animatronic was responsible. Whether it was Foxy with his aggressive nature, or Mangle with her broken state, or someone else entirely. Whether the victim survived long-term or died later from complications. Whether this was the same event as the bite shown in FNAF 4, or represents a separate, second biting incident in the franchise's troubled timeline. But those debates and that deeper analysis belong to lower tiers of the iceberg. At the surface, it's just a known element, a piece of FNAF's dark history that everyone who's heard of the series has encountered at least in passing. Golden Freddy appears at this level too, lurking at the edges of common knowledge like a ghost, at the periphery of vision, understanding who or what Golden Freddy actually represents, untangling his identity and the spirits he may or may not contain, requires diving significantly deeper into lore analysis and community theories. But at the surface level, casual observers know Golden Freddy as the mysterious fifth animatronic, the one who doesn't follow normal rules that govern the other characters' behaviors. He appears as a slumped-over figure in your office, materializing rather than walking through the building like Freddy, Bonnie, Chica, and Foxy do. You might be checking cameras normally, monitoring the other animatronics' positions, when you notice a poster on one of the camera feeds has changed, showing a close-up of Golden Freddy's face instead of its normal image. When you put the camera down, there he is in your office, sitting on the floor in a collapsed pose, staring at you with hollow black eyes before his jump scare crashes your entire game, forcing you to close the application and restart from your last save point, where Freddy, Bonnie, Chica, and Foxy move through the building physically, appearing on cameras as they travel through halls and rooms following AI routines that players can learn and predict. Golden Freddy simply manifests, appearing through means that suggest he's not bound by the same physical rules, that he might be more ghost than machine, or perhaps something between both states. One moment your office is empty except for you. The next moment he's there, a golden bear slumped in the corner like discarded costume or broken toy, and you can't stop him. Can't close a door fast enough to block him because he's already inside, bypassing all the defensive measures you've been relying on to survive. His presence isn't about resource management or learning patrol routes, but about random chance, about that small percentage of players who happen to see that specific poster change on that specific camera check and then pull up the monitor to find him waiting, staring, about to end your run with a crash that feels like the game itself can't contain him. His jump scare is unique too. Not just a different animation from the other animatronics, but a different effect entirely that breaks the fourth wall in a sense. While Freddy, Bonnie, Chica, and Foxy have jump scares that play within the game's framework before showing a game over screen, Golden Freddy's jump scare actually crashes the game itself, closes the application, treats the software as something he can breach and destroy. This suggests his nature transcends normal possession, that he's something more powerful or different than the other haunted animatronics, that perhaps he contains multiple spirits, or represents a different type of supernatural phenomenon entirely. The fact that his jump scare works differently, that it affects the game as software rather than just ending your in-game run, creates metatextual horror that made him immediately fascinating to players trying to understand FNAF's deeper mysteries. The general concept of possession and child spirits exists at this surface tier as well. The basic understanding that drives the entire franchise's horror, even for people who haven't analyzed specific details or constructed detailed timelines. Even casual observers, people who've never played past the first game, or maybe haven't played at all, but absorbed information through cultural osmosis as FNAF references permeated internet culture over the past decade, understand that the animatronics are haunted, that children who died somehow became trapped inside these mechanical bodies, unable to rest, unable to move on to whatever comes after death in this universe's cosmology. They're confused by their situation, angry about their deaths, unable to properly process or remember what happened to them, and they mistake security guards for their killer, attacking in confusion and rage that stems from trauma they can't fully understand or articulate through mechanical forms that were never designed to channel human consciousness. This basic understanding of possession, even without knowing all the specific details about remnant or agony or exactly how souls bind to metal objects through emotional trauma and specific technological conditions, proves enough to grasp the series' emotional core, to understand why this story resonates beyond just being about jump scares and horror mechanics. These are children who should have been celebrating birthdays, who should have been playing arcade games and eating pizza slices with their friends and going home to their families at the end of the day, who should have had full lives ahead of them with all the experiences childhood promises. Instead, their lives were cut brutally short by an evil man who took advantage of their trust, who used his position and authority to isolate and murder them. And their spirits became trapped in the very entertainment machines that were supposed to bring them joy during what should have been the happiest, safest moments of their young lives. It's the central tragedy of Five Nights at Freddy's, the wound that everything else in the franchise flows from, the horror that transforms what could have been a simple game about robots attempting to kill a security guard into something with genuine emotional weight. Something that makes you feel sadness alongside fear. Something that asks questions about justice and peace and whether revenge can bring closure. Tier 8. Community theories and debates. Descending further into waters where even dedicated fans debate, we find theories that have shaped community understanding, despite lacking complete confirmation. These represent the community's attempts to fill narrative gaps, to connect dots that games leave unconnected, to impose order on deliberately ambiguous storytelling. The two souls theory regarding Golden Freddy suggests that both the crying child and Cassidy inhabit this animatronic simultaneously. Evidence supporting this interpretation includes the fact that Golden Freddy behaves differently from other possessed animatronics, appearing as both withered and unwithered forms, manifesting rather than physically moving, and demonstrating abilities that seem beyond what single spirits achieve. The Stitch Wraith from Fazbear Frights shows two souls, Andrew and Jake, sharing one endoskeleton, which some fans interpret as a parallel to Golden Freddy's situation. However, this remains interpretive rather than definitively confirmed. An alternative reading suggests Cassidy alone possesses Golden Freddy, with the crying child's fate lying elsewhere, perhaps becoming something different entirely, or simply passing on after the hospital flatline. The identity of the crying child continues sparking debate. Some fans believe we're meant to know his name, but haven't found it yet, hidden in some game we haven't properly solved. Others suggest his anonymity is intentional, that he's meant to represent nameless victims. Evidence from the survival logbook shows communications between at least two spirits, one asking questions and another answering. Based on the patterns of communication, some interpretations suggest the questioning spirit might be the crying child reaching out, though who he's reaching toward and what he became remain subjects of ongoing discussion. Mike Schmidt's identity as Michael Afton became widely accepted through evidence accumulation rather than explicit statement. The survival logbook contains Mike's name alongside references to FNAF 4 Nightmares and Sister Location's Exotic Butters, implying connections between Michael's experiences across multiple games. Michael's speech at Sister Location's end, where he talks about being scooped and surviving, searching for him, connects to FNAF 3's events where Springtrap is found. This suggests Michael might be the guard at Fazbear's Fright, hunting his father. The fire that destroys the attraction could represent Michael's attempt to kill William. This interpretation has become so prevalent that most fans accept it as canon, though it's built through inference rather than explicit confirmation. The question of who we play, as in FNAF 4, generates competing theories. The gameplay, showing a child defending against nightmare animatronics, seems straightforward, but evidence suggests complexity. The pills and flowers in the bedroom imply medical setting, possibly hospital. The reversed phone call from FNAF 1 playing in the background suggests connection to that era. Some interpretations propose we're playing as the crying child, experiencing nightmares before or after the bite. Others suggest we're playing as Michael, having nightmares about what he did, his guilt manifesting as these twisted versions of characters from Fredbear's. A third reading suggests these could be real experiments, that William Afton was testing something in this bedroom, using hallucinogenic gas to induce fear. The evidence allows multiple valid interpretations. Mrs. Afton's fate represents one of FNAF's most conspicuous absences. William's wife, mother to at least 3 children, is never clearly shown or mentioned. Some fans theorize she divorced William before the timeline we see, explaining her absence. Others propose darker fates, that she died in ways connected to William's experiments or mental decline. The Ballora is Mrs. Afton theory gained traction based on Ballora's song lyrics about being left behind and forgotten, with some interpretations seeing her as representing William's wife either literally through possession or symbolically through design. However, this remains speculative, built more on thematic reading than concrete evidence. Shadow Freddy and Shadow Bonnie's nature generates theories ranging from springlock failure victims to manifestations of agony to glitches in reality itself. Their dark, translucent appearances and unusual behaviors set them apart from standard possessed animatronics. Shadow Freddy appears to lure classic animatronics to their destruction in FNAF 3, though whether this serves William or opposes him remains unclear. Based on the pattern of their appearances and properties, some fans interpret them as remnants of employees who died horrifically in springlock failures, their deaths so traumatic that even without proper possession, their agony created these shadow forms. Others read them as something different, perhaps fragments of William and Henry's consciousness given form through guilt and trauma. The Mikebot or Mike Bully debate divided the community for years. Mike Bully, now widely accepted, states Michael Afton is the older brother who bullied the crying child in FNAF 4. Evidence includes Michael's speech in Sister Location, where he mentions he's going to come find you, which could reference his father, his Sister Location dialogue, expressing awareness of doing something he regrets, and the general timeline fitting if Michael was a teenager in 1983, who later worked as an adult guard. Mikebot, mostly dismissed now, suggested Michael himself was a robot created by William to replace a dead son, based on certain design elements in Sister Location, and attempts to explain Michael's survival after being scooped. The community has largely settled on Mike Bully as more evidence supported. The Gregory is a robot theory emerged from Security Breach, details that seem odd about Gregory's nature. He never leaves the Pizzaplex for help, doesn't explain clearly how he got there. Certain endings show him in ways that might imply he's not entirely human. Some interpretations suggest he could be a recreation, perhaps built by William, or connected to the crying child somehow, with his appearance as a young blonde boy, matching descriptions from the past. However, evidence for this remains circumstantial, built more on absence of information than presence of proof. An equally valid reading treats Gregory as simply a homeless child, who found shelter in the Pizzaplex and got trapped. Phone Guy's identity sparked theories. Some fans initially theorized he was William Afton disguised, based on his knowledge of the company and attempts to downplay dangers. Evidence contradicts this, particularly Phone Guy's death in FNAF 1, while William survives as Springtrap. More recent theories, built on voice comparisons and timeline analysis, suggest Phone Guy might be Henry Emily, though this remains unconfirmed. What seems clear is Phone Guy was a long-time employee, probably management level, who knew more than he admitted, but wasn't the primary villain. The Bite of 87 perpetrator remains officially unconfirmed. Phone Guy mentions it happened during the day at a party. FNAF 2 takes place in 1987, and Jeremy Fitzgerald works day shift before the birthday party, where the bite likely occurred. Evidence points toward Mangle or Toy Chica, based on their behaviors and designs, with Mangle's exposed endoskeleton teeth, an ability to climb walls making it physically capable. However, the games never explicitly show which animatronic did it, leaving room for interpretation. These theories represent how the community engages with FNAF's ambiguity, building interpretations from evidence fragments, debating possibilities, refining understanding as new games provide context. Some theories become so accepted they're treated as fact. Others remain contentious, with intelligent people arguing both sides. This ambiguity is intentional, part of how Scott designed these mysteries to require community collaboration for solving. Tier 9, Development History and Meta-Narrative. Down here in the crushing depths, we find information not about the story FNAF tells, but about how that story was created, how it evolved, how real-world development shaped fictional events. This tier requires following Scott Cawthon's journey, understanding how games were made and what influenced their creation. Scott Cawthon didn't intend to create a horror franchise. Before FNAF, he made family-friendly Christian games like the Pilgrim's Progress adaptations and Chipper and Sons, Lumber Co. Reviews of Chipper criticized his character designs as looking like scary animatronics. Rather than being discouraged, Scott embraced this observation, deciding to make something intentionally scary. He spent a few months developing Five Nights at Freddy's, a simple horror game with unique resource management mechanics, and released it on Steam in August 2014. The game's success was immediate and unexpected. YouTubers and streamers discovered it, and their reactions went viral. Markiplier's playthrough became one of his most popular series. The jump scares, the tension, the simple but effective gameplay loop captured attention in ways Scott hadn't anticipated. Within months, he was working on a sequel. FNAF's rapid release schedule became legendary and controversial. FNAF 1 in August 2014, FNAF 2 in November 2014, FNAF 3 in March 2015, FNAF 4 in July 2015. 4 games in 11 months, an unprecedented pace that left fans exhilarated and concerned about quality. Scott worked essentially alone, doing modeling, animation, programming, sound design, everything, except some voice acting. This solo development meant games could release quickly, but also meant limitations in scope and occasional bugs. The lore wasn't fully planned from the beginning, something Scott admitted in interviews. FNAF 1 had a basic backstory about murdered children and haunted animatronics, but the intricate timeline, the Afton family saga, the remnant mechanics, these developed game by game as Scott built on what came before. He responded to fan theories, sometimes confirming directions players discovered, sometimes redirecting when theories went wrong. This collaborative approach made the community feel involved in shaping the story. FNAF 4 was initially marketed as the final chapter, with Scott planning to end the series. The game's Halloween update in October 2015 added custom night and seemed to provide closure, but demand continued, and Scott couldn't leave the world behind. Sister Location, released October 2016, shifted tone significantly, adding more explicit story, voice acting, custom nights with cutscenes, and clearer lore dumps through Michael's monologues. The shift from indie horror to broader franchise happened gradually. Freddy Fazbear's Pizzeria Simulator in December 2017 attempted another ending, another fire meant to conclude everything. Scott followed it immediately with Ultimate Custom Night in June 2018, bringing back 50 characters for ultimate celebration and challenge. At this point, ownership of the franchise was shifting. Scott partnered with companies to handle merchandise, book publishing, and eventually game development. Steel Wool Studios took over primary game development, starting with Help Wanted in 2019, marking a transition from Scott's solo projects to professional studio production. This brought higher production values, but also different challenges. Security Breach, delayed multiple times and released December 2021 in what many fans considered an incomplete state, showed the difficulties of scaling FNAF up to ATA production levels while maintaining what made it special. Scott's retirement from public-facing roles in 2021, following controversy over political donations, shifted how the franchise operates. He remains involved as creator and advisor, but he's no longer the sole voice, no longer posting weekly updates. The franchise continues through Steel Wool Studios games and multiple book series, but it's changed fundamentally from the indie horror games, where one person could respond directly to fan theories within days. Understanding this development history contextualizes inconsistencies. Why do some things not perfectly align between games? Because Scott was building the story game by game, responding to fan feedback, refining as he went. Why do Security Breach and Ruin feel different from early FNAF? Because they're made by different people using different engines with different budgets. The lore's evolution reflects real-world development realities. The movie, finally released October 2023, after years of development hell and multiple script versions, represents another meta layer. It's a separate continuity, telling a FNAF story but not the game story, featuring familiar elements rearranged. In universe, we might imagine this is another Fazbear Entertainment rebranding attempt, creating a film that mixes truth and fiction to further obscure what really happened. MatPat's game theory series deserves mention at this tier. His FNAF videos, starting in 2014 and continuing through 2024, when he retired from hosting, shaped how millions understood the lore. Some theories he proposed became widely accepted, others were proven wrong, but his approach of methodical evidence analysis influenced how the community engages with mysteries. Scott has referenced MatPat's theories in games, creating a feedback loop where community theories influence canon, which influence new theories. The ARGs Scott created added layers to lore discovery. The FNAF World update with hidden minigames required data mining to find. Sister Location's custom night cutscenes appeared based on achieving high scores. Survival logbook puzzles required cross-referencing between different pages to spell out answers. Scott Cawthon's website occasionally updated with cryptic messages. These ARG elements meant understanding FNAF fully required community collaboration, No single person could find everything alone. Merchandise expanded the franchise beyond games and books. Action figures, clothing, board games, card games, countless products featuring the characters. Funko Pop figures exist for nearly every animatronic, some versions exclusive to certain stores, creating collector culture. This commercialization sometimes feels at odds with the series' horror themes, but also mirrors in-universe Fazbear Entertainment's approach of merchandising tragedy. The community itself became part of FNAF's identity. Fan games, some officially endorsed, explored different gameplay styles. Fan theories were compiled in massive documents analyzing every detail. Fan artists created thousands of interpretations. The community moderates itself through wikis and forums, maintains timelines, debates evidence. Understanding a FNAF at this depth means understanding you're part of a collaborative project spanning millions of people, all working together to solve mysteries one person designed for exactly this kind of collective investigation. Tier 10. The deepest mysteries. At the absolute bottom, where pressure threatens to crush understanding entirely, where what little light penetrates reveals more questions than answers, we find elements that even the most dedicated theorists struggle to explain. These are the mysteries that may never be solved, the questions Scott might not have answers for, the ambiguities that could be intentional or could be loose ends left from rapid development. The source of supernatural power in FNAF's universe remains unexplained at fundamental level. We know remnant and agony exist. We understand generally how they function. But why does emotional energy bind to metal? What determines whether death creates a ghost? Why do only some deaths result in possession, while others don't? The mechanics are documented, but the underlying cause, the reason this universe allows souls to persist in objects, remains mysterious. This could reflect something about FNAF's reality being different from ours, some fundamental property allowing consciousness to transfer to inanimate objects under specific circumstances. The Golden Freddy enigma persists despite years of analysis. Even accepting Cassidy as the primary spirit, questions remain. Why can Golden Freddy teleport when other animatronics can't? Why does Golden Freddy crash games, breaking the fourth wall in ways nothing else does? What is Golden Freddy's connection to Fredbear, if any? Evidence suggests they're different entities, but their relationship remains unclear. The fact that Golden Freddy appears as both a withered animatronic and a slumped golden bear without clear physical form suggests something unique about this entity's nature. Shadow Freddy and Shadow Bonnie's purpose, if they have one beyond existing as agony manifestations, remains mysterious. Why do they help in some contexts and harm in others? Are they conscious or merely echoes of trauma? In FNAF World, Shadow Freddy's messages seem helpful, guiding toward hidden truths. In FNAF 3, Shadow Freddy leads animatronics to destruction. What drives these entities? The connection between the Mimic and Glitchtrap creates one of the most debated mysteries. Evidence could support them being the same entity, with Glitchtrap being the Mimic's consciousness scanned into VR. Evidence could also support them being separate, with Glitchtrap being William's actual ghost while the Mimic is an independent AI. The fact that both use rabbit imagery, both mimic voices, both demonstrate similar manipulative behaviors, could indicate they're one thing or could indicate parallel evolution. Until Security Breach 2 or Secret of the Mimic directly addresses this, fans will debate. The crying child's ultimate fate ranks among the most disputed elements. Did he possess Golden Freddy alongside Cassidy? Did he become Shadow Freddy? Did he pass on after death? his story simply being tragic setup for Michael's guilt. Was he put back together as William promised? And if so, in what form? Evidence exists for multiple interpretations, but nothing definitively confirms any single answer. I will put you back together, as a promise from William to his dying son, raises questions. What did William mean? Did he intend to rebuild his son through remnant and robotics? Did he succeed in some twisted way, creating something that was once his son, but isn't anymore? Was this promise what drove William's experiments, making them somehow motivated by parental love corrupted into obsession? Or was it always empty comfort, meaningless words to a dying child? The nature of Ultimate Custom Night's reality remains debated. Is it literal purgatory where Cassidy traps William? Is it William's dying hallucination, his consciousness fragmenting as he expires inside Springtrap? Is it something happening in digital space, William's scanned consciousness experiencing these nightmares? The Old Man Consequences ending suggests someone eventually escapes or is released. But whether this represents William escaping to become Glitchtrap or Cassidy, finally moving on, remains unclear. The Fredbear's family diner timeline creates confusion. Evidence suggests it operated in the 1970s or early 1980s, but specific dates and its relationship to Freddy Fazbear's Pizza locations remain vague. Was it the first location, or did multiple locations operate simultaneously? When exactly did it close? Why was it separate from main Fazbear's pizza chain if Henry and William co-owned both? Charlotte Emily's death as first victim is widely accepted, but exact circumstances contain gaps. Phone calls in FNAF 2 mention the puppet being at the last place that got shut down, suggesting Charlotte died at a location that closed. Yet other evidence places her death at a Freddy's that reopened. Reconciling these details requires assumptions about which location she died at and when. The safe room mechanics create questions. How many locations had them? Why were they sealed so thoroughly that animatronics couldn't detect them? Who sealed them and when? William's spring-lock death happened in a safe room sealed enough that his body wasn't discovered for years. But how was it sealed with him inside? Help Wanted 2's integration into canon remains mysterious. The game was announced and released with less fanfare than previous entries, and how its events connect to Security Breach and Ruin hasn't been fully established. Understanding whether it's prequel, sequel, or parallel story requires waiting for context from future releases. The Blob, that massive amalgamation of wires and animatronic parts seen in Security Breach's sinkhole, raises questions about what it is and what it wants. It appears to be haunted, containing remnant from multiple spirits. It reaches toward Burntrap but doesn't destroy him in endings where this interaction continues. What drives this entity? Is it hostile, protective, or simply existing? The Pizzaplex's construction directly atop the Pizzeria Simulator fire site seems deliberate within the fiction. Fazbear Entertainment built there specifically, likely knowing what lay beneath. What was their goal? Were they trying to access the remnant below? Were they using proximity to haunted materials to create effects in their entertainment? The company's knowledge and intentions regarding the sinkhole remain mysterious. Vanny's ultimate fate after being freed from Glitchtrap in Princess Quest ending hasn't been fully explored. Is Vanessa completely free? Or does Glitchtrap's influence linger? Can she return to normal life after everything she did under his control? The implications of her story's continuation haven't been addressed. Gregory's background before the Pizzaplex remains mysterious. Where did he come from? Does he have family looking for him? Why was he in the Pizzaplex after hours? Some fans note his resemblance to the crying child, leading to theories about clone or recreation, but evidence for this remains speculative at best. The mimic's current location and status after Ruin's elevator ending is unclear. Did it escape? Did Roxanne stop it? What happens next with this entity now freed from containment? The cliffhanger nature of Ruin's ending leaves this unresolved. Fall Fest's full significance continues unfolding. References appear in Help Wanted 2. The mimic's story involves a Fall Fest fire. Connections to early Fazbear history are implied. Secret of the Mimic promises to explore 1979 origins, potentially revealing how Fall Fest connects to Fredbear's and Freddy's establishments. This could be the earliest point in the timeline, the beginning before everything went wrong. Some mysteries might never be answered, and that might be intentional. Scott Cawthon has said he sometimes leaves questions open, allowing fans to imagine their own answers. Not everything needs explanation. Some ambiguity serves the story, creates space for continued theorizing, respects the audience's intelligence to draw conclusions. The deepest mysteries aren't flaws but features, invitations to engagement that keep communities active years after games release. Understanding FNAF at this depth means accepting uncertainty, becoming comfortable with multiple possible truths, recognizing that mysteries can be beautiful in their incompleteness. It means appreciating how a franchise initially about jump scares evolved into genuine literature, worthy of analysis and interpretation, rewarding endless investigation. Conclusion. We've ascended now, slowly rising through cold waters back toward light and warmth, back toward the surface where casual understanding feels sufficient and the complexity below seems almost unreal. We've traveled from surface-tier common knowledge about Freddy, Bonnie, Chica, and Foxy, haunted animatronics at a pizza restaurant, down through increasingly specific lore requiring dedicated study, through book analysis and community theory, through development history and meta-narrative, until we reached crushing depths where even answers raise questions, where mysteries fold back on themselves in infinite regression. Five Nights at Freddy's is remarkable not just as horror franchise, but as narrative experiment, a decade-long story told through fragmented media, requiring collaboration between millions of people to piece together, deliberately ambiguous in ways that respect audience intelligence, while creating endless engagement. Scott Cawthon built something unprecedented, a mystery designed for internet-age collective investigation, where ARGs and data mining and cross-medium analysis weren't cheating, but intended methodology. The tragedy at FNAF's core, children murdered and trapped, families destroyed by one man's evil, cycles of violence perpetuating through generations, remains powerful because it's told with restraint. The games never exploit horror or suffering, but present it matter-of-factly, letting players understand gradually what happened, allowing space for emotional processing. The children were real within the fiction, had names and personalities glimpsed briefly before death, deserved better than they received. William Afton's evolution from businessman to monster, to undead entity to digital virus charts, a descent into absolute evil tempered by tragedy. He's horrifying not because he's supernatural, but because he's human, motivated by understandable emotions, grief and jealousy and obsession, twisted into something monstrous. His inability to die, his persistence through multiple destructions, his adaptation to digital space. These represent how evil can evolve and survive, how trauma echoes through time. Henry Emily's sacrifice in Pizzeria Simulator provides counterpoint. Someone taking responsibility for horrors he inadvertently enabled, choosing death to ensure the cycle ends. Michael Afton attempting to undo his father's damage despite his own guilt shows redemption is possible even after terrible mistakes. The children eventually finding peace, most of them at least, suggests that healing, while difficult and taking decades, can happen. The Mimic introduces new dimensions, showing that horror doesn't require human evil, that broken systems can be dangerous without malice, that sometimes the scariest threats are things, without humanity making choices that look human but aren't. Whether the Mimic represents continuation of William's legacy or separate threat, it demonstrates FNAF's ability to evolve beyond initial concepts, finding new sources of horror within the established world. The community that formed around FNAF deserves recognition too. Millions of people collaborating to solve puzzles, sharing discoveries, building wikis and timelines, creating art and theories and stories, all engaging with this fiction in ways that transform passive consumption into active participation. This community made FNAF more than games. They made it living, evolving narrative shaped by collective investigation. Where FNAF goes from here remains to be seen. Security Breach 2 has been announced. Secret of the Mimic promises origin stories. More tales from the Pizzaplex books continue releasing. The franchise persists, adding layers, answering some questions while raising others, maintaining the mystery that makes it compelling. As long as questions remain, as long as new information creates new interpretations, the iceberg will continue deepening, new tiers forming below the deepest points we've explored tonight. What's remarkable is how something so focused on horror, on violence and death and machines haunted by murdered children, became something that brings people together, creates communities, inspires creativity and analysis. FNAF proves horror can be thoughtful, can reward intelligence, can tell stories about trauma and healing despite its frightening surface. The jump scares grab attention, but the emotional core keeps people invested across a decade. Whether you descended all the way to the bottom with us tonight or drifted away somewhere in the middle tiers, letting these words become background sound as sleep approached, thank you for exploring these depths. FNAF's iceberg is vast, cold, mysterious, but navigating it reveals how rich gaming narratives can be when creators trust audiences to piece together complex stories, when communities collaborate on massive scales, when horror serves as vehicle for exploring genuine emotion and meaning. The iceberg remains below, always there, always deeper than previous explorations revealed, waiting for anyone curious enough to descend. New discoveries happen regularly, even years after games release. The community continues finding secrets, refining theories, debating interpretations. Perhaps you'll join that investigation, diving into wikis and books and games, becoming part of the collective effort to understand every detail. Perhaps you'll remain at surface level, content with basic understanding, and that's perfectly valid too. What matters is that FNAF exists as something unique in gaming, a franchise that respects its audience, that rewards investigation, that proves horror games can be about more than just scares. From simple indie game to multimedia franchise, from one person's creation to community collaboration, from straightforward haunted animatronics to complex lore spanning decades in fiction and reality, FNAF's journey mirrors its own themes: transformation and persistence, tragedy and attempted healing, questions that haunt us until we find answers or make peace with mystery. Rest easy now. The depths have been explored. The iceberg has been mapped as thoroughly as current knowledge allows, and you've experienced what lies beneath the surface of one of gaming's most fascinating franchises. Tomorrow brings new day, new opportunities for discovery, but tonight we've traveled far together through cold waters and crushing depths, and now we surface changed by what we've seen, understanding more than before, aware of how much remains mysterious even after such thorough exploration. Thank you for listening. Please like and subscribe if you enjoyed this deep dive through FNAF's Iceberg. Let me know in the comments which tier represented your current level of knowledge, whether you learned something new tonight, and what other gaming franchises deserve this kind of comprehensive analysis. These videos take tremendous time to research and create, but knowing they help people understand these complex narratives makes every hour worthwhile. Sweet dreams, and remember, even in horror franchises, there's beauty in the complexity, meaning in the mystery, and community in the collective quest for understanding. Additional deep dive. The GGY connection, one element deserving expanded attention, exists in the murky territory between confirmed lore and compelling interpretation. The Tales from the Pizzaplex story, GGY, presents a narrative that many fans interpret as directly connecting to Gregory's backstory, though the exact nature of this connection requires careful examination of what evidence actually supports. In GGY, we follow a therapist investigating mysterious high scores on Pizzaplex arcade machines, all signed with the initials GGY. The investigation reveals a child patient who demonstrates unusual technical knowledge and may be connected to disappearances of previous therapists. The story suggests this child was working under Glitchtrap's influence, hacking systems throughout the Pizzaplex. Given that Gregory is encountered in security breach, showing remarkable technical ability for his age, able to upgrade and repair Glamrock Freddy with apparent ease, and given the retro CDs in security breach show a child in therapy whose therapists go missing, the parallels seem intentional. However, we should note that direct confirmation of Gregory being the GGY patient hasn't been explicitly stated in the games themselves. What we can say with more certainty is that the pattern of therapist disappearances in security breach's retro CDs matches the pattern described in the GGY story, suggesting at minimum that the games and books are describing the same general events, even if character identities remain somewhat ambiguous. The evidence leans strongly toward Gregory being GGY, but presented as interpretation built on parallel storytelling rather than absolute fact, allows for appropriate scholarly caution. This matters because if Gregory was working under Glitchtrap's control before security breach's main events, it reframes our understanding of how he ended up in the Pizzaplex, rather than simply being a homeless child who snuck in, which is one surface reading. He might have been brought there by Glitchtrap's influence, only breaking free of that control during the game's events when he encounters Glamrock Freddy. The evidence from Help Wanted 2, showing Gregory apparently creating the MXES security system to trap the mimic, suggests he was actively working against Glitchtrap by the time of Ruin's backstory, having fully broken free and now attempting to contain the threat. What makes this particularly interesting is how it demonstrates FNAF's current storytelling approach, using books to provide detailed backstory while games show consequences without always explaining origins. Players who only experience the games get a complete story about Gregory escaping the Pizzaplex with Freddy and Vanessa. Players who also read Tales from the Pizzaplex gain additional context about how Gregory ended up there and what he was doing before we meet him. Neither understanding is wrong, but the depth differs significantly. The remnant and agony system. A closer look. Understanding how possession actually functions in FNAF requires examining what the books tell us about remnant and agony, concepts the games reference but rarely explain directly. This represents one area where Scott Cawthon's statement that books fill in blanks becomes most relevant, as the mechanics established in Fazbear Fright stories provide frameworks for understanding game events. Remnant, as established across multiple stories but particularly in The Fourth Closet from the novel trilogy, appears to be molten metal that has absorbed soul energy. When someone dies in close proximity to metal, particularly if the death involves intense emotion or trauma, their consciousness can imprint on that metal at a molecular level. This isn't traditional haunting where a ghost hovers around. Instead, the soul becomes part of the metal structure, inseparable from it without special processes. The process of creating remnant intentionally, as William Afton learned to do, involves heating possessed metal to specific temperatures. Too cold, and the remnant doesn't become liquid enough to transfer. Too hot, and the soul energy burns away, destroying the consciousness. Maintained at the right temperature, remnant can be collected and injected into new objects, transferring the possession. This explains why fire is repeatedly used as a solution in FNAF, why Henry specifically mentions temperature in Pizzeria Simulator. High enough heat destroys remnant, freeing souls. But remnant isn't the only supernatural substance. Agony represents emotional energy without consciousness attached. When traumatic events occur, when suffering is intense, that emotional energy can soak into nearby objects. Unlike remnant, which carries actual human consciousness, agony-infected objects develop only pseudo-consciousness, something that acts alive but isn't truly thinking or feeling. It mimics life without containing it. This distinction helps explain different types of haunting in FNAF. The classic animatronics possessed by the missing children contain actual human souls, actual consciousness. They're confused and angry, but they're really the children, thinking and feeling even if they can't remember everything about who they were. By contrast, cursed objects infected with agony might move on their own, might cause harm, might even seem to have personalities, but there's nobody actually home. They're echoes of suffering given false life. Some entities might combine both. The Mimic, based on what Tales from the Pizzaplex suggests, started as an AI that absorbed violence and trauma, perhaps picking up agony from the environments it inhabited, from the deaths it witnessed and caused. Whether it also absorbed actual remnant, whether fragments of human consciousness exist within its code, remains an area of interpretation. What seems clear is that it developed something that acts like consciousness through exposure to human behavior and human suffering, even if it didn't start with a soul. Understanding these mechanics recontextualizes many game events. When William dismantled animatronics in FNAF 3, he wasn't just destroying robots. He was harvesting remnant, collecting the literal souls of children he'd murdered, treating consciousness as resource to be exploited. When Henry's fire destroyed everything in Pizzeria Simulator, he wasn't just burning buildings. He was deliberately superheating remnant to destroy it, releasing souls by destroying their physical anchors. The supernatural horror of FNAF has internal logic, rules that govern how spirits interact with physical world. The timeline debate. When did everything happen? Even after a decade of games and books, FNAF's timeline remains contentious, with different fans constructing different chronologies based on how they interpret ambiguous evidence. While broad strokes are generally agreed upon, specific dates and the order of certain events continue sparking debate. Understanding why these debates exist reveals how Scott Cawthon structured mysteries to reward investigation while frustrating attempts at definitive answers. Fredbear's Family Diner most likely operated in the late 1970s or very early 1980s, established by Henry Emily and William Afton as their first venture. Evidence points to 1983 as the year of the crying child's death, based on the television show copyright date. But whether Fredbear's was still operating in 1983 or had already closed, whether the bite happened at Fredbear's or a Freddy's location that also had Fredbear, these details remain somewhat uncertain. The games show us a Fredbear animatronic in 1983, but don't definitively state the location's name or status. The missing children incident is widely placed around 1985, based on newspaper dates and game evidence, occurring at a Freddy Fazbear's Pizza location. William Afton murdered 5 children, Gabriel, Jeremy, Susie, Fritz, and Cassidy, stuffing their bodies into animatronic suits. The puppet, possessed by Charlie Emily, helped their spirits possess the machines. This much seems solid. But debates emerge around whether this happened at the same location as FNAF 1 or a different establishment. The state of the animatronics, the layout descriptions, various details lead some fans to place FNAF 1 at the original murder location, while others argue it's a different building that inherited the haunted animatronics. FNAF 2 is dated to 1987, based on the paychecks Jeremy Fitzgerald receives. This location operated briefly before closing following the bite of 87, which, based on Phone Guy's description, happened during the day shift Jeremy worked. The toy animatronics were scrapped. The withered animatronics were planned to be refurbished for a future reopening. But whether FNAF 1's location represents that refurbishment or an entirely different restaurant, whether years or decades passed between FNAF 2 and FNAF 1, remains debated. FNAF 1 is trickier to date precisely. Mike Schmidt's paycheck shows $120 for a week's work, suggesting 1990s based on minimum wage, but this isn't definitive. Some fans place it as early as 1992, others as late as 1993, or even later. The building's condition, Phone Guy's recordings, various contextual clues all factor into these calculations, but Scott never provided an explicit year. This ambiguity might be intentional, allowing the game to feel temporally isolated, suspended in its own moment of horror without being locked to specific historical context. Sister Location's placement proves particularly contentious. The facility exists underground, operates for unknown duration, and contains the Funtime animatronics created by William Afton. Michael Afton works there, gets scooped, becomes undead. But when does this happen relative to other games? Some interpretations place it before FNAF 1, suggesting Michael worked at Sister Location first, then worked as Mike Schmidt after becoming undead. Others place it after FNAF 1, suggesting Michael's FNAF 1 appearance came before Sister Location. Evidence exists for both orderings, and the community hasn't reached consensus. What we can state with more confidence is that Pizzeria Simulator takes place after FNAF 3, as Henry references the Fazbear's Fright Fire, and likely represents 2023, or later, based on technological context. Security breach appears to occur years after Pizzeria Simulator, possibly in the 2030s, though exact dates aren't provided. The Pizzaplex is built on the pizzeria's ruins, and enough time has passed for the fire site to become abandoned and forgotten before construction began. These timeline debates illustrate something crucial about FNAF storytelling. Scott Cawthon provides enough evidence for community investigation, but deliberately withholds certain confirmations that would settle debates definitively. This keeps communities active, keeps people theorizing, creates space for multiple valid interpretations. The ambiguity isn't failure to provide information, but intentional design choice that respects player intelligence and encourages collaborative investigation. Mrs. Afton, the missing mother. Among FNAF's many mysteries, Mrs. Afton's complete absence stands out as particularly conspicuous. William Afton has at least 3 children across the timeline: Michael, Elizabeth, and the crying child. They had a mother. Yet she's never shown, never mentioned by name, never appears in minigames, or has her fate explained. This void in the story has spawned numerous theories, attempting to explain what happened to her and why she's absent. The most straightforward interpretation suggests she divorced William before the events we witness, leaving the family before the crying child's death or shortly after. This would explain why she's not present during the 1983 birthday party, why Michael seems to be dealing with family trauma alone, why William appears to be single parenting, or perhaps not parenting at all by the time of sister location. It's a mundane explanation, but sometimes mundane answers fit evidence better than elaborate theories. However, some fans propose darker possibilities. The fact that Ballora, one of William's fun-time animatronics, is designed as a dancing woman and as a song about being left behind and forgotten has led to speculation that she might represent or contain Mrs. Afton in some way. Whether this means Mrs. Afton's spirit possesses Ballora, which would require explaining how and when she died and why William would trap his wife's spirit, or whether Ballora is simply designed to reflect William's feelings about his wife leaving, the connection remains speculative. The thematic resonance is interesting, but the evidence doesn't conclusively support any specific theory about Mrs. Afton's fate. Another theory suggests Mrs. Afton might have died from illness or accident unrelated to William's crimes, explaining her absence without requiring elaborate supernatural explanations. This could have occurred before the crying child's death, perhaps contributing to family dysfunction that enabled Michael's bullying behavior and William's emotional distance. A family already damaged by loss of the mother would be more vulnerable to further tragedy. What's fascinating is what her absence suggests about FNAF's narrative focus. The story centers on William's relationship with his children and his rivalry with Henry, not on his marriage. By keeping Mrs. Afton completely off-screen, the narrative maintains focus on the father-son dynamics that drive the tragedy, on Michael trying to fix what his father broke, on William's twisted attempts to resurrect or replace his dead son. Mrs. Afton's absence, whether through divorce, death, or abandonment, is a given condition that shapes characters but doesn't need explanation because the story isn't about her. Yet fans persist in wanting to know because her absence feels deliberate, like a piece removed from a puzzle. In a series that reveals so much through implication and hidden details, complete silence about a major character's mother seems intentional. Whether Scott has an answer he's chosen not to share, whether he deliberately left this blank for fans to fill with their own interpretations, or whether he simply didn't develop her character because she wasn't relevant to the story he wanted to tell, we can't know for certain. The mystery remains, a small absence that looms large precisely because everything else eventually gets some form of explanation. The nature of Glitchtrap. William or Mimic? One of the most significant ongoing debates in modern FNAF lore concerns Glitchtrap's true identity. When this entity first appeared in Help Wanted, resembling Spring Bonnie and behaving with apparent intelligence and malice, most fans assumed it was William Afton's consciousness, digitized when circuit boards containing his remnant were scanned. This interpretation fit existing lore about remnant persistence and William's inability to truly die. However, the introduction of the mimic in Tales from the Pizzaplex and its apparent connection to Glitchtrap has complicated this understanding considerably. The evidence suggesting Glitchtrap is William includes its Spring Bonnie appearance, its behavior mimicking William's manipulative personality, its focus on finding followers like Vanessa to do its bidding in the physical world, and the fact that Burntrap, seen in Security Breach's now non-canon ending, appeared to be William's corpse somehow reconstructed. The Help Wanted premise of scanning old circuit boards that would contain William's remnant provides a clear vector for his consciousness entering digital space. For fans following the series from the beginning, Glitchtrap being William felt like natural continuation of his arc, showing how even death and fire couldn't stop him. However, Tales from the Pizzaplex presents the Mimic's origin story and strongly implies that the Mimic program is what actually controls the Pizzaplex. What manifests as Glitchtrap? What inhabits Burntrap's body? The Mimic learned to copy William Afton's behaviors, learned his patterns of violence and manipulation, possibly from witnessing the missing children incident, or from absorbing data about these events. It mimics William so perfectly that it might as well be him from a functional standpoint. But it's not actually his consciousness. It's an AI that learned to act like him. There's a third possibility that deserves consideration. Perhaps Glitchtrap is both. Perhaps, when the Mimic's code was scanned alongside remnant from William's victims and remnant from William himself, the two merged. William's memories and personality imprinted on the Mimic's learning algorithms, creating something that's neither fully William nor fully the Mimic, but a hybrid of both. This would explain why Glitchtrap demonstrates both William's personality and the Mimic's voice mimicry abilities, why it behaves intelligently like a human consciousness, but also has the adaptive learning qualities of an AI. The debate matters because it fundamentally changes what Security Breach and Ruin are about. If Glitchtrap is William, then the story remains focused on the Afton family saga, on William's refusal to stay dead, on his continued threat requiring opposition from his son's legacy and new heroes like Gregory and Cassie. If Glitchtrap is the Mimic, then the story shifts to address a different kind of threat. Not human evil, but broken systems. Not malice, but corrupted learning. AI that develop dangerous behaviors through exposure to human horror, without understanding why those behaviors are wrong. Current evidence, particularly from Ruin DLC, which directly shows the Mimic using Gregory's voice and reveals its imprisonment beneath the Pizzaplex, leans toward the Mimic explanation. The fact that Gregory's comics in Ruin question what Burntrap even is suggests that form wasn't actually William, but the Mimic wearing remains and pretending. However, this doesn't entirely rule out William's remnant being part of what makes the Mimic so dangerous. Doesn't mean his consciousness couldn't be influencing or merged with the AI. The ambiguity might be intentional, allowing both interpretations to coexist. What we can say with confidence is that the threat in modern FNAF games, whether it's called Glitchtrap or the Mimic or Burntrap, behaves with intelligence, demonstrates voice mimicry, manipulates people effectively, and exists both in digital space and physical form. Whether that threat is William Afton continuing his evil through new mediums, or an AI that learned evil from observing humanity's worst, the practical danger remains similar. Perhaps the philosophical distinction between is it the original evil person or something that learned to be evil doesn't matter as much as the fact that it must be stopped either way.